Alyssa went shopping at Hermes with her best friend Chloe. At checkout, Chloe looked at the bag in her hand with confusion. "Kelly doll, didn't you dislike this style? Why did you buy it? It's for my husband's mistress. She likes it." Chloe looked at Alyssa with heartache. "You and Eddie used to be so deeply in love. How did things end up like this?" Alyssa smiled faintly without answering. "Yes, how did they end up like this?" After leaving the Hermes store, Alyssa waved goodbye to her best friend Chloe and walked toward the Bugatti parked by the roadside. An hour later, the Bugatti pulled up in front of Villa 11 at Guanshanyuan. Alyssa entered the villa to find Eddie sitting on the living room sofa reviewing reports. She handed the newly purchased Hermes bag to Eddie. "What's this supposed to mean?" Eddie asked, clearly puzzled. "Valentine's Day is here. I bought your girlfriend a bag." Eddie looked at Alyssa's completely unruffled expression, then stood up and hugged her. "Honey, you've changed so much this past month. I always said the three of us could get along peacefully, didn't I?" Alyssa first placed the bag on the coffee table, then gently pushed him away. "You're right, I should have done this sooner." Eddie didn't notice her subtle movement, glancing at the bag on the coffee table. "Keep this bag, I've already bought her a new one." With that, he picked up his coat from the sofa. "I should go see her today, honey. You rest well at home by yourself." "Okay." Alyssa watched Eddie leave and threw the handbag on the coffee table straight into the trash. Then she sat on the sofa, listening to the roar of the Porsche outside the villa, fading from near to far. "Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day." Now the story begins. She and Eddie had grown up together since childhood, raised in the same compound. As they grew older, mutual affection blossomed between them, naturally leading to dating and marriage. However, in the second year of their marriage, Eddie cheated, secretly getting involved with Betty, a financially struggling student Alyssa had once sponsored. This year marks their third year of marriage. Throughout the year Eddie was unfaithful. Last year, Alyssa cried and made scenes, but nothing worked. She still remembers how devastated she was the first time she saw Eddie rolling in their marital bed with Betty. She scratched Betty's face and tore the nightgown Betty was wearing. She then drove both of them out and smashed everything in the master bedroom. The quilt they had slept under and the clothes they had worn were all burned by her. That night, Alyssa collapsed amidst the wreckage, staring blankly at the moonlight outside the window, watching it the entire night. Early the next morning, she called Eddie back and asked him, "Does that open marriage you mentioned before still stand?" At the time, Eddie thought Alyssa couldn't bear to truly break things off with him, which was why she asked that. He lit a cigarette, then nodded. "Of course it counts. As long as you agree, I can find women outside, and you can find men outside. Our marriage stays the same." Eddie was certain Alyssa wouldn't dare. Certain Alyssa loved him deeply. Certain Alyssa was very traditional. But he didn't know, Alyssa had made up her mind. Just after that day, she secretly found herself a young boyfriend behind Eddie's back. She's been with her younger boyfriend for almost half a year now. Alyssa sat alone on the sofa resting. Her phone chimed with a WeChat notification, a message from Betty, a photo of Eddie's back as he cooked in the kitchen. "Alyssa, the porridge Eddie made is really good. I'll have him bring some back for you later." Alyssa didn't reply, instead opening Betty's social media feed. The latest post showed a photo of the full Hermes Kelly doll color collection. "You promised I'd never have to envy anyone." Betty would update her social media feed every time after sending a message to Alyssa. Alyssa gazed blankly at the photo of Eddie cooking in the kitchen. Eddie had learned his cooking skills from her, yet she'd never tasted a single dish he made. One man sows and another reaps. "I wonder if Eddie still remembers what he said to me. Baby, once I learn how, I'll cook for you every day." Now he's learned, but cooks for someone else. In a daze, Alyssa's phone rang again, a message from her boyfriend Brian. "Baby, I made your favorite cola chicken wings and some side dishes. I know it's not convenient for you to see me, so I had a courier deliver them to you. Remember to eat well. Love you." Alyssa looked at the photo of the meal, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. She too was loved by someone. Half an hour later, Alyssa took the food from the delivery person. She arranged the dishes on the table, took a photo, and posted it on her social media. "Just looking at it makes my mouth water. Love it." As soon as she posted it, comments started pouring in. "Brian, as long as you like it, baby." "Betty, sis Alyssa, remember to save some room for the porridge Eddie cooked." Alyssa exited the social media feed, turned off her phone, and began eating. Brian's cooking skills were excellent, and Alyssa had eaten most of the dishes on the table. After finishing her meal, Alyssa got up and went upstairs. After washing up and changing clothes, she went to bed. Before sleeping, she saw Betty mentioning her in a social media post again. You said you could pluck the stars from the sky for me. I don't want the stars, I just want you to stay by my side forever." The accompanying photo showed Betty and Eddie holding hands, with Betty wearing a red diamond ring on her left hand. A night without dreams. Early the next morning, Alyssa was having breakfast when Eddie returned. He walked straight to the dining room and placed a black velvet jewelry box on the table. "Your Valentine's Day gift from last week's Berlin auction. Thank you." Alyssa took the gift box and opened it to reveal a flawless square-cut blue diamond inside. Eddie gazed at her with deep affection. "I promised you I'd give you a blue diamond every year, and this year's couldn't be missing." Hearing this, Alyssa looked up at him, her eyes drifting down to the love bites on his neck and collarbone, utterly perplexed. How did he manage to juggle his mistress while still remembering to placate his wife? Alyssa put away the diamond and said apologetically, "Sorry, I forgot to prepare a Valentine's Day gift for you." Eddie was momentarily stunned. In the past, after the two got together, every year Alyssa would prepare his gift well in advance. How could she have forgotten this year? Alyssa added when she saw him remaining silent, "Should I make it up to you tomorrow?" Eddie averted his gaze and said indifferently, "No need. Mom and Dad asked us to have dinner at the old house. Change your clothes and come with me later." With that, Eddie turned and went upstairs. Meanwhile, Alyssa carried the diamond into the walk-in closet. Placing it alongside the previous 6, she and Eddie had been together for 7 years, from courtship to marriage, and each year Eddie would gift her a blue diamond. Blue diamonds symbolize eternal and pure love, yet Eddie's love had long since vanished. Alyssa changed her clothes and sat in the living room waiting for Eddie to go back to the old house together. However, it wasn't long before she saw Eddie coming downstairs with a cold expression. "Alyssa, Betty fell at home. I'm going over to check on her. You go back to the old house first, and I'll catch up later." Having said that, he quickly walked out of the villa. Alyssa had grown accustomed to carrying gifts for Eddie's parents alone, taking the bus back to the Emanuel family's old estate. An hour later, Alyssa stepped off the bus with the gifts and entered the old estate. As soon as she walked into the villa, Mrs. Emanuel warmly came forward to greet her. "Alyssa is back. Come on in, Mrs." Emanuel took the gift from Alyssa's hands and looked behind her. "Where's Eddie? Why didn't he come with you?" "He's busy. He'll be here soon," Alyssa replied, sitting in the living room. Mr. Emanuel frowned upon hearing this. "Always busy. Let's eat first. No need to wait for him." As soon as the words were spoken, Eddie walked into the villa, his black coat dotted with a few snowflakes. "Something came up at work and delayed me." Eddie looked terrible, his brows furrowed with irritation and impatience. Alyssa had grown up with him and knew him well. Seeing this expression on his face, she immediately knew he must have had another fight with Betty. Eddie was exceptionally affectionate with Betty when they first started their affair, sneaking around day and night behind their partner's back. But after being caught and entering a threesome arrangement, Betty became increasingly dissatisfied, constantly making various demands of Eddie. Fortunately, Alyssa's boyfriend was obedient enough to never argue with her. Mrs. Emanuel glared disapprovingly at Eddie. "No matter how important things are, you can't just leave Alyssa to come back alone. Since you married Alyssa, you should always put her first." Eddie glanced at Alyssa sitting beside him. Perhaps moved by his mother's words, a trace of guilt flashed through his eyes. "Understood. Let's eat." At the dinner table, Eddie remained absent-minded, constantly unlocking his phone to check messages. Mrs. Emanuel placed a piece of sweet and sour spare ribs on Alyssa's plate. "Alyssa, if Eddie upsets you, just tell Mom, and I'll stand up for you." Alyssa forced a smile, though it was chillingly cold. "Thank you, Mom." After a meal, as she and Eddie were about to leave, Mrs. Emanuel called out to Eddie again. "Eddie, wait a moment. I have something to say to you." Seeing this, Alyssa tactfully said, "I'll wait for you in the car first." Only after Eddie entered the house, Alyssa didn't leave. She stood not far away and overheard Mrs. Emanuel ask Eddie, "You look so terrible today. Is it because of that woman you're keeping outside? You can have your fun, but don't go too far. You absolutely must not let Alyssa find out about the other woman. You grew up together, and both families know each other inside out. Besides, our Emanuel family's business relies entirely on the Armstrong family to keep running. Don't risk losing everything over something trivial. Besides, Alyssa is the only daughter of the Armstrong family. When her parents pass away someday, won't all of the Armstrongs' wealth be yours?" Eddie dismissed it casually. "Mom, don't worry, Alyssa won't mind even if she knows. She loves me and can't live without me." Alyssa silently listened to their conversation and returned to her car. She lit a cigarette and took a few puffs. At that moment, her phone vibrated, a message from her boyfriend Brian. "Alyssa, I miss you. After I finish the Paris flight route, could you leave him? Let's be together openly. Get married, what do you say? Alyssa turned off her phone, leaving the message unanswered. At this moment, Eddie also got into the car and sat down. Distracted, he occasionally unlocked his phone to check messages, failing to notice Alyssa's unusual behavior. An hour later, the car stopped at the entrance of Guanshanyuan Villa. Alyssa had just stepped out of the car when she saw Betty standing at the villa's entrance in a white dress, her face streaked with tears, looking pitifully fragile. Betty saw Eddie get out of the car and threw herself into his arms, sobbing, "Eddie, I promise I'll never bring up you getting a divorce again. Please don't be mad. Okay, I just want you to spend more time with me." As she spoke, she stood on tiptoe to kiss Eddie S. Adams' apple and collarbone. Eddie S. Adams' apple bobbed as he looked down at the thinly dressed Betty, his expression softening. "Just this once." With that, Eddie scooped up Betty and carried her into the villa. Alyssa stood behind them, watching it all unfold. The door to the master bedroom on the second floor clicked shut. Alyssa stood in the snow, with fluttering snowflakes falling upon her. Moments later, she took out her phone and replied to Brian's last message inquiring about marriage. "Fine, I promise." Alyssa had just sent the message when Brian's call came through. "Alyssa, are you serious?" Alyssa looked at the sunset on the horizon and replied, "If you don't mind that I'm divorced, we can get our marriage license in a month." "Of course I don't mind. You know I've liked you for 12 years. If it weren't for Eddie getting there first, we would have been together long ago." Brian's voice trembled with excitement. "All right then, I'll wait for you to come back." Alyssa hung up the phone, took one last look at the villa behind her, and walked toward the Bugatti parked by the roadside. The Bugatti drove out of Guanshanyuan Villa and headed straight to Jingxing Law Firm. Lawyer David had been waiting for her early and handed her a divorce agreement. "Ms. Alyssa, over the past 6 months, our law firm has gathered all the necessary evidence to ensure your husband leaves with nothing. Thank you." Alyssa took the agreement, left the law firm, and checked into a hotel to sleep. Eddie had just cheated for half a year when Alyssa couldn't accept it, but in the following half year, she came to terms with it, not because she had compromised, nor was it to have an affair herself. Instead, it was to gather evidence of Eddie's infidelity so she wouldn't lose both love and money. Before bed, Alyssa received the usual message from Betty. "Sis Alyssa, why aren't you home yet?" Alyssa ignored it, turned off her phone, and went to sleep. The next day, she drove to Emmanuel's family group with the divorce papers prepared by her lawyer to find Eddie. Entering the office, Eddie was on the phone. "All right, I promise I'll go home earlier to spend time with you from now on." "Okay." Alyssa walked up and handed him the divorce papers. "Here's an agreement that needs your signature." Eddie, exhausted from dealing with Betty, didn't even glance at the agreement Alyssa had brought. He directly signed his name on the designated line, Eddie. Only then did he speak to Betty on the other end of the phone. "Betty, be good and stop fussing. I need to work now. Wait for me at home like a good girl." Eddie hung up the phone and looked up at Alyssa, who was organizing files. "I was wrong yesterday. I shouldn't have brought someone home. It won't happen again. You're not mad, are you?" Alyssa shook her head. "No, didn't we agree on an open marriage?" Eddie rubbed his temples and pulled Alyssa onto his lap. "Baby, you're so much more understanding than Betty." As he spoke, his hand slipped beneath Alyssa's skirt. Alyssa grabbed his hand firmly. "Not today." Eddie withdrew his hand with displeasure and grumbled. "Why is it that every time I want to get close to you lately, you're never in the mood? I miss you." After feasting on rich foods, one needs some plain congee and pickles to cleanse the palate. Alyssa pushed his hand away and stood up. "You know I have uterine coldness. The TCM doctor said I need to take herbal medicine for over half a year to regulate it." Ever since learning Eddie had someone else, she stopped sharing a bed with him. Eddie, his expression softened considerably. "It's only about a month left." "Right, after that month, we'll do it. I'll save all the bullets for you." Alyssa forced a smile. "Okay, then." She walked out of the CEO's office. The moment she turned around, Alyssa clenched her fists, responding to his words in her heart. "Eddie, I don't need you anymore, because someone else has already filled the void." Alyssa walked out of the Emmanuel family estate and handed the signed divorce papers to attorney David, entrusting him with handling the remaining procedures. She and Eddie had registered their marriage in Country M, where unilateral divorce was permitted. The divorce decree would be issued within a month. In 1 month's time, she and Eddie would be officially divorced. Stepping out of the law firm, Alyssa opened her phone and looked at the date displayed, February 16th. She swiped through the calendar and added an entry for March 16th, divorce, then remarry. After saving her itinerary, Alyssa drove back to the Guanshanyuan Villa. She went to the second-floor walk-in closet and began packing her clothes. The sun set in the west as the bright moon hung high in the sky. By the time Alyssa emerged from the walk-in closet, it was already 1 a.m. Eddie's Porsche also happened to pull into the courtyard. Alyssa had just taken a quick shower and was about to rest when she heard a knock at the door. She got up and opened the door. Eddie stood before her holding a glass of milk. "Saw you were still awake, so I warmed some milk for you. Drink it while it's hot." Alyssa took the milk. "Thank you." She had a sensitive stomach. Eddie would warm a glass of milk for her every night. This had never stopped since they got together at age 18. Eddie stroked her hair. "Get some rest." With that, he turned and walked back to his room. Perhaps because he had brought Betty home earlier, Eddie felt guilty toward Alyssa. For the following week, he came home before midnight every night and occasionally even cooked meals for Alyssa himself. Betty would text her at every mealtime, bragging about the various positions she and Eddie had tried the night before. 3 times a day, without fail, Alyssa ignored Betty's provocation and proceeded to send those photos to her lawyer as planned. The 7th evening, Alyssa and her best friend Chloe attended a banquet together at the Billionaire Hotel, which was run by Emmanuel's family. As soon as she entered the banquet hall, Alyssa spotted Eddie in a Milanese hand-tailored suit walking alongside Betty, who was dressed in a figure-hugging pantsuit. "Eddie, are you going back home again tonight? I want you to stay with me." Betty clung to Eddie's arm and coquettishly pleaded in front of everyone. There were also some guests and friends present who were acquainted with both the two families. They teased in jest, "Eddie, you're truly blessed with romantic fortune, having both a beautiful and capable sister-in-law at home and a charming young mistress by your side. Eddie, how do you manage it? Teach us your ways." "Brother," Eddie curled the corner of his lips, his eyes brimming with self-satisfaction, "you'll never learn, because there's only one Alyssa in this world, and only she loves me enough to tolerate everything about me." Hearing this, Betty shook off Eddie's hand and stormed out in anger. Eddie immediately chased after her. Standing not far away, Alyssa pondered over Eddie's words. "Big sister-in-law, little sister-in-law. Are you willing to tolerate everything about him?" Alyssa, her eyes filled with mockery. Her best friend Chloe clenched her fists. "Eddie is such a scumbag, treating this kind of thing as bragging rights. And I heard he arranged for Betty to be the manager of Billionaire Hotel. How blatant can he get? Are you really willing to keep sharing Eddie in this 3-way relationship? You're not the type to swallow insults quietly." Alyssa took a sip of champagne, her eyes calm and composed. "I've filed for divorce. Soon, he and I will have nothing to do with each other." Chloe was shocked at first, then her face lit up with relief. "It's about time you did this. Back then, so many people pursued you. It's not like you're unloved. Just an Eddie. Forget him if you want." Alyssa nodded. "You're right. I won't take him back. A man who isn't clean doesn't deserve her sorrow." After the banquet, Alyssa returned alone to the Guanshanuan villa. Late at night, Alyssa, as she drifted into sleep, she faintly felt a pair of warm, large hands resting on her waist, gently caressing. The familiar scent of cedarwood, mingled with a faint trace of alcohol, drifted into her nostrils. Alyssa frowned slightly and opened her eyes, only to feel Eddie's overwhelming kisses raining down on her smooth back. Her body instinctively resisted. "Eddie, you're in the wrong room." Eddie pulled her forcefully into his embrace, holding her tighter and tighter, his voice hoarse. "Alyssa, I love you. I won't touch you. Just let me hold you for a while. That's all I need." Eddie held her tightly, as if she were a treasure, but Alyssa knew all too well that Eddie had only come back to her because he'd fought with Betty. He didn't truly love her at all. Sure enough, before long, Alyssa's phone on the bedside table suddenly sounded an earthquake warning countdown. Earthquake waves approaching Jing City in 34 seconds. Alyssa and Eddie both felt the bed beneath them shaking. Eddie's vision cleared, his eyes filled with conflict. "Alyssa, it's an earthquake. The villa isn't far from the emergency shelter. You go ahead. Betty is home alone. I can't rest easy. I need to check on her." With that, Eddie quickly ran toward the door. Alyssa watched his retreating figure without much sorrow, quickly dressed herself, and stumbled towards the emergency shelter. Half an hour later, the ground finally stopped shaking. Alyssa stood alone, looking around at others who were in pairs or small groups, all accompanied by family or loved ones. Only she was by herself. "Alyssa," at that moment, a voice sounded not far away. Alyssa saw Brian, dressed in a pilot's uniform, running toward her with a face full of concern. "Alyssa, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Alyssa's eyes inexplicably reddened at the corners when she saw him. "I'm fine. Why did you come over?" Brian let out a sigh of relief. "I rushed over as soon as I heard about the earthquake on the news after landing. Thank goodness you're okay." As soon as he finished speaking, Alyssa's phone rang. It's Eddie calling. Alyssa, how are you? Are you okay? Alyssa tightly gripped Brian's hand as she heard Betty's crying through the receiver. Is Betty okay? Eddie sounded utterly exhausted. She's fine, just shaken up. I probably won't be coming back tonight, need to stay with her, Alyssa said in a flat tone. It's fine, a few nights won't matter, Eddie replied hoarsely. Alyssa, don't be difficult, if you're scared, go stay with friends, I'll come back to keep you company tomorrow night. Alyssa glanced at Brian beside her. All right, I have a friend keeping me company. She hung up the phone as soon as she finished speaking. That night, Brian held her hand and stayed with her in the emergency shelter until dawn. They only left after confirming there were no aftershocks. Alyssa returned alone to the Guanshanyuan villa. She hadn't slept all night and was utterly exhausted, returning to her room to catch up on sleep. When she woke up and went downstairs, she saw Eddie busy in the kitchen. Eddie emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of durian pastries, placed them on the dining table, and took her hand to sit her down on a chair. Sorry I couldn't come back to be with you last night. I made durian pastries to make it up to you. Don't be mad anymore, okay? Alyssa pushed the durian pastry aside. Eddie, you forgot I'm allergic to durian. Eddie was taken aback, his expression tinged with regret. Sorry, I'll make something else instead. Don't bother. Alyssa stood up to leave. Eddie strode forward, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her into his embrace. Alyssa, it was my oversight. Don't be angry. I shouldn't have gone to find Betty. From now on, I won't go anywhere. I'll stay home with you. Okay, I promise this is the last time. I'll never leave you for anyone else again. Promises like this had been made countless times before, but Eddie never kept them. Okay, Alyssa responded to him half-heartedly. For the next half-month, Eddie indeed didn't go looking for Betty, returning home punctually after work every day. Every night after coming home, he would buy Alyssa a bouquet of flowers. Apart from not sleeping in the same room, everything was just like when they first got married. That day, Eddie and Alyssa were invited to attend their friend Andrew's birthday party at the Snow Ridge camp cabin. Outside, snow was falling heavily, while inside, the atmosphere was lively. Eddie sat down next to Alyssa. Alyssa had intended to have a shot of tequila but was stopped. Aren't you supposed to be taking care of your health? Don't drink alcohol, have some juice instead, as he spoke. Eddie handed her the orange juice and draped a blanket over her legs. The group immediately started teasing Eddie when they saw this. Eddie, stop showing off your affection. We had to endure your PDA back in school, and now you're still not letting us off the hook. One of them pushed a glass of whiskey toward Eddie. Eddie, have a drink. Eddie frowned and pushed the glass aside. Alyssa doesn't like the smell of alcohol on me. I'll pass. Andrew teased upon seeing this. Eddie, when did you become a henpecked husband? Always has been. As he spoke, Eddie turned to look at Alyssa, his eyes filled with tenderness. Alyssa averted Eddie's gaze, took a sip of the orange juice in front of her, and remained silent. She didn't like the smell of alcohol, so Eddie stopped drinking. She didn't like Eddie cheating, so why did he still do it? Halfway through the gathering, Alyssa got up to go to the restroom. As she came out of the restroom and was about to return to the cabin, she saw Eddie and Betty standing at the cabin's entrance. Eddie looked visibly impatient. Who told you to come here? Didn't I say we shouldn't meet for a while? Betty pulled Eddie's hand and placed it on her lower abdomen. But I missed you, and the baby missed you too. Eddie's face instantly turned cold. How could you be pregnant? Didn't I take precautions every time? Betty held his hand, sobbing. I don't know either. Maybe it's fate. Eddie, why don't you divorce her and be with me? Our family of 3 would surely be so happy. Eddie frowned. Betty, have I ever told you that I would never divorce Alyssa? He and Alyssa had grown up together since childhood. Besides, only Alyssa was suited to be his wife. Betty burst into tears like a rain-soaked pear blossom. I'm sorry. I just love you too much. Eddie softened at her tears and lowered his head to kiss her. Alyssa stood frozen, watching the two embracing and kissing at the camp entrance. Already numb to the pain in her heart, she turned and walked back to the cabin. An hour later, Eddie finally returned and pulled her onto the balcony. Alyssa, there's a meteor shower tonight. Let's make a wish. As he spoke, he took Alyssa's hand and gazed at the dark sky. Alyssa, I hope we can grow old together and be happy forever. Alyssa silently withdrew her hand and turned to look at the fleeting meteor in the sky, a silent wish upon a shooting star. I hope Eddie never finds true love in this lifetime. May he grow old alone. The snow fell heavier and heavier. Eddie pulled Alyssa outside to build snowmen. He made one tall and one short snowman, then said to Alyssa, Look, Alyssa, don't they look just like us? Alyssa put on her gloves and built a small snowman between the two. Now it's just right. Eddie gazed at the little snowman, his eyes flickering with subtle changes. Alyssa, once you've regulated your uterine coldness, let's have a child. Alyssa looked at the snowman without speaking. Eddie, I can bear children, but not with you. The roads were slippery from the snow, so the two stayed overnight in the wooden cabin. Early the next morning, Eddie received a call from Betty and left Alyssa behind again. Alyssa drove back to Guanshanyuan alone. She checked the time on her phone. March 2nd, 14 more days. She and Eddie will be officially divorced. As soon as she arrived at the villa, she spotted the package at the doorstep addressed to her. Opening the package, I found a realistic baby doll and a pregnancy test result inside. The name on the pregnancy test was none other than Betty. At the same time, Alyssa received a message from Betty. Alyssa, thank you for sponsoring my education back then. I've sent you a gift, you should have received it by now. I hope you'll like it. Then, she sent another message. It was a picture of Eddie cooking in the kitchen. Alyssa, I really love Eddie. I'm now pregnant with his child, and the child can't grow up without a father. Could you divorce him and let me have him? Please. Alyssa didn't reply, turning off her phone as she stared at the pregnancy test results in her hand. Gestational age: 9 weeks and 5 days. As usual, she handed all the evidence over to her lawyer. Eddie didn't return until 10 p.m. the next night. After coming back, he heated a glass of milk for Alyssa and then left. This went on for 10 straight days. He'd only returned to heat a glass of milk for her before leaving again. Alyssa didn't press him about where he'd been. On the third to last day before leaving Emmanuel's house, Mrs. Emmanuel called. Alyssa, my headaches are back. Call your grandfather and ask him to come give me acupuncture at the old house. Alyssa's grandfather was a renowned physician, with generations of her family practicing traditional Chinese medicine. Even the wealthiest elites would find it difficult to secure a personal consultation with her grandfather. Only her grandmother could effortlessly summon the octogenarian to their ancestral home for medical examinations. Alyssa recalled what Mrs. Emmanuel had previously said to Eddie. Alyssa is an only child. The entire Armstrong family fortune will be yours. She flatly refused. Mom, you're not feeling well. You should go to the hospital for a checkup. My grandfather has already retired and doesn't see patients anymore. On the other end of the phone, Mrs. Emmanuel was stunned when she heard Alyssa refuse. Because the Alyssa of the past would never refuse her requests. Alyssa, I'm your mother-in-law after all. If you can't even do this small thing for me, I'm truly heartbroken, Mrs. Emmanuel said unhappily before hanging up the phone. As for Alyssa, she didn't care about her words at all. There were still 3 days left. Soon, she would no longer be her mother-in-law. Alyssa took a shower and went to bed. Before going to bed, she received a video sent by her best friend Chloe. I went to the bar today and happened to run into Eddie. Take a look. In the video, someone asked Eddie, Eddie, which one do you prefer? The big wife or the little wife? Eddie swirled the glass in his hand and let out a light chuckle. Being with Betty for so long, it's just, meh, Alyssa is still better. In the end, I realized I love Alyssa more. I prefer Alyssa. I've decided to end things with Betty. After all, I've already experienced that feeling. It's nothing special. Once I've had my fun outside, I'll fully return to my family, and I'll never betray Alyssa again. His friend Andrew, sitting nearby, said, Eddie, it's not too late to turn back now, but what if Alyssa finds another man out there and leaves you? What then? Eddie said with certainty. No way. Alyssa loves me so much, even in an open marriage, she wouldn't be with someone else. The video abruptly ended. Alyssa put away her phone, gazing at the bright moonlight outside the window and murmured, Eddie, this time, you overestimated me. Early the next morning, Alyssa got up and went downstairs to find Eddie had already prepared breakfast. Eddie, dressed in light grey loungewear, immediately broke into a gentle smile when he saw Alyssa. Come have breakfast. I made all your favorites. Alyssa walked into the restaurant and sat down. Eddie handed her the tablet. Jinwan Hotel is hosting an auction today. Want to go take a look? Just pick whichever you like, and I'll bid for you. Alyssa slid the image and saw a pair of blue diamond wedding rings, perfect for her and Brian's marriage, so she nodded in agreement. Okay. After breakfast, the driver took the two of them to Golden Bay Hotel. During the red light, Eddie saw someone proposing at Blue Sand Plaza. Eddie watched the man kneeling on one knee to propose and sighed. 3 years ago when I proposed to you, I was just as nervous as him. Thank goodness you said yes. And thank goodness you're still by my side. Alyssa followed his gaze to the newly engaged couple embracing on the plaza. Remembering the vows Eddie had made when he proposed to her 3 years ago, Alyssa, since childhood, I've played every possible role by your side, neighbor, childhood friend, classmate, boyfriend. Now I want to take on the final role, your husband. the person you can entrust your life to. I will love and protect you forever. Alyssa, will you marry me? Eddie had occupied almost the first half of her life, and of course, she wanted to spend the rest of it with him too, so she said yes. The moment the ring was slipped onto her ring finger, Eddie made another vow. Alyssa, I swear I will love you forever and always protect you. I love you. However, Eddie's forever only lasted 2 years. An hour later, the driver parked the car at Golden Bay Hotel. The auction commenced. Eddie bid on an emerald and diamond necklace with matching earrings for Alyssa. When it came to the blue diamond wedding ring, Alyssa raised her paddle. Eddie turned to look at her. Thinking of changing your wedding ring? I'll bid for it. It wasn't just about changing the wedding ring, she was going to change the man too. Alyssa pressed down Eddie's hand. This one, I want to bid for myself. Eddie smiled, instinctively thinking it was meant for him. Okay, in the end, Alyssa won the wedding ring with a bid of $1.5 million. After the staff handed the wedding ring to Alyssa, she put it away. Why are you putting it away? Eddie asked, puzzled. Alyssa merely said calmly, it's not the time to wear it yet. Eddie pondered for a moment before asking, are you waiting for your wedding anniversary? Alyssa didn't respond. Eddie, but he took her silence as agreement. Then I'll start preparing your anniversary gift too. The auction concluded, and the two returned to the villa at Guanshanyuan. Alyssa went upstairs and was about to enter her room when Eddie embraced her from behind. Alyssa, I want to end the open marriage and return to our family. We grew up together. Share the same interests and tastes, we're the most compatible. Let's be together properly from now on. What about Betty? Alyssa asked. Eddie said earnestly, she won't bother us anymore. I know you're jealous of her, but rest assured, from now on you'll be the only woman in my life. My wife can only be you. Let's talk about it tomorrow, Alyssa replied verbally, but what she thought in her heart was, tomorrow, you won't be my husband anymore. After returning to her room, Alyssa glanced at the time on her phone. The next morning, early, Alyssa was awakened by a delivery call. Hello, Ms. Alyssa, you have an international delivery. Would it be convenient for you to receive it now? Convenient, I'll go get it right away. Alyssa got dressed and went downstairs just as the villa's doorbell rang. She opened the door to find not a delivery person, but a tear-streaked Betty. Betty knelt down immediately upon seeing Alyssa. Alyssa, I beg you, my child can't grow up without a father. Please give up Mr. Eddie for me, won't you? Just coming downstairs, Eddie immediately pulled Betty up upon hearing this, scolding her sharply. Betty, what nonsense are you spouting? Betty clung to Eddie's arm, pleading desperately. Mr. Eddie, I really like you. Could you accompany me one last time? I swear after today, I'll never appear before you again. Perhaps overwhelmed by emotion, Betty blacked out and nearly fainted after saying these words. Eddie, seeing this, flashed a look of panic in his eyes, quickly steadied her, and turned to Alyssa. Alyssa, the child was an accident. I promise this is the last time. Please believe me, I'll take her to the hospital first. Wait for me to come back and I'll explain everything. I swear you're the only one I've ever loved. With those words, Eddie carried Betty and drove to the hospital. Right after they left, Alyssa received the divorce papers mailed from Country M. She forwarded the divorce decree, pregnancy test results, and Betty's provocative WeChat messages to both her assistant and the PR department. From now on, terminate all business dealings with the Emanuel family. At 12 noon today, announce my divorce from Eddie. The reason for the divorce is Eddie's infidelity. Make all of this public. I don't want my divorce to affect the company. The assistant responded. Understood, Ms. Alyssa. I'll handle it right away. After completing all this, Alyssa hung up the phone. Finally, she called her bodyguard to take out all her belongings from Emanuel's house. Then, without looking back, she boarded the car sent by the Armstrong family to pick her up. Alyssa told the driver, to the Civil Affairs Bureau. An hour later, arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Waiting at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau was Brian. Alyssa stepped out of the car. Brian's anxious expression instantly softened upon seeing her. I thought you weren't coming. Alyssa gave Brian's hand a gentle squeeze and said softly, something came up and delayed me. Let's go in, okay? The two walked into the Civil Affairs office together, VIP ward of the Maternal and Child Health Hospital. Betty lay on the hospital bed, her face pale, her right hand protecting her abdomen while her left hand clung tightly to Eddie's hand. Eddie, please don't leave, I truly love you. I'm carrying your child now, why won't you marry me? Eddie shook off Betty's hand, his brow furrowed with impatience. Betty, how could you ever compare to Alyssa? I told you from the start, this was just fun. I'll never divorce Alyssa. Get rid of the child quickly. The money's already in your account. Handle it. Betty sobbed uncontrollably. Eddie, This is your child too, how can you bear to abort it? I know my family background can't compare to Alyssa's, but I love you more than Alyssa does. With that, she stood up and grabbed Eddie's hand, pleading desperately once more, Eddie, please, let me keep the baby, okay? I'll leave with the child and promise never to appear before you again. Eddie listened, his gaze icy as he stared at her. Betty, if I had no money or power, would you still love me this much? Betty froze. A flicker of hesitation flashing through her eyes, Eddie understood, pulling away from Betty's grasp. So, Betty, know when to stop. The money in your account is enough to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. Get rid of the child soon, and don't harass me and Alyssa again. Next time, I won't be this lenient. With those words, Eddie turned and walked out of the ward. Betty was too weak for surgery at the moment. Eddie arranged for a nurse in the ward, waiting until she recovered before scheduling the surgery immediately. After leaving the hospital, Eddie had the driver take him back to the Guanshanyuan villa. All the way, Eddie was thinking about how to cheer up Alyssa. Back when Alyssa found out he was with Betty, she was so angry. Now that she knows Betty is pregnant, Alyssa will surely be even more furious. Eddie had the driver stop at a flower shop along the way, where he bought a bouquet of tea-colored lisianthus. After returning to the villa, Eddie stood at the entrance, took a deep breath, and then pushed the door open to go inside. Alyssa, I'm back. The words fell without response. There was no sign of Alyssa on the first floor of the villa. Eddie frowned and stepped up to the second floor, knocking on Alyssa's door. Alyssa, can I come in? I want to explain about Betty. After waiting for a long time without a response, Eddie directly pressed the door handle. The door was unlocked. Eddie startled for a moment before pushing it open and walking in. Once inside, he froze in place. Alyssa's bedroom was completely empty. The interior was as spotless as a showroom, devoid of any trace of life. Eddie felt a sudden surge of unease. He dropped the flowers in his hand and hurried into Alyssa's walk-in closet. It was equally empty and immaculate. Alyssa's clothes were all gone, and the gifts he had given her had disappeared as well. Everything was gone. Eddie quickly took out his phone and called Alyssa. He called 10 times in a row. Alyssa didn't answer once. Not blocked, just ignored. Eddie then messaged Alyssa on WeChat, same result. Not blocked or deleted, just no reply. He was just about to call Alyssa's best friend Chloe when his assistant called first. Mr. Eddie, something terrible has happened. Check the trending topics. Eddie hung up the phone and opened the trending list. When he saw the top trending topic, he froze instantly on the spot. Armstrong family CEO Alyssa announces divorce from Emmanuel family CEO Eddie. Countless calls immediately flooded Eddie's phone. Eddie ignored them all, his trembling hands opening the trending news. The account announcing their divorce was none other than the official Armstrong Family Corporation. The first photo uploaded to the account was Eddie and Alyssa's divorce decree in Country M. The remaining photos were Betty's pregnancy test results and screenshots of all the provocative WeChat messages she sent to Alyssa. Eddie stared fixedly at the divorce decree, suddenly remembering the agreement Alyssa had asked him to sign when she came to his office that day. At the time, he was on the phone with Betty and didn't pay attention to what Alyssa was asking him to sign. So, it was actually divorce papers. Alyssa had long wanted to divorce him. The Armstrong family's corporate Twitter was flooded with netizens voicing their outrage. Betty was even a student Alyssa once sponsored. Not only did she fail to show gratitude, but she also repaid kindness with betrayal, seducing someone else's husband and even sending provocative WeChat messages. How shameless can one be? Is Eddie blind? Betty might be decent looking, but she's nowhere near Alyssa. Do rich people just have a thing for the innocent type? She looks innocent but plays dirty. Good riddance, sister. May the trashy couple rot together. Eddie exited the trending list and dialed Alyssa's number again, but she still wouldn't answer. He had no choice but to call his assistant. Find Alyssa's location immediately. Alright, Mr. Eddie. Eddie sat on the living room sofa, anxiously waiting for his assistant's call. 5 minutes later, the assistant called. Where? Eddie asked urgently. The assistant stammered for a long while before saying, Madam is at the Civil Affairs Bureau, queuing up with a man to get their marriage certificate. Eddie, upon hearing this, his mind went blank for a moment, then he immediately stood up, strode out of the villa, and without waiting for the driver, drove alone to the Civil Affairs Bureau. What should have been an hour's journey was forcefully shortened to half an hour by him. Eddie, after getting out of the car, he hurriedly ran towards the Civil Affairs Bureau, but before he could get close, he saw Alyssa holding a red marriage certificate, arm in arm with a strange man, both of them smiling happily. Eddie stood frozen in place, staring in disbelief at the scene before him. when he regained his composure, he strode forward and roughly pulled Alyssa toward him, his voice icy with accusation. Alyssa, what's the meaning of this trending topic? How dare you unilaterally file for divorce? I won't allow it. Alyssa frowned and sharply shook off Eddie's hand. Eddie, we don't need mutual consent for divorce. You should be literate, the court order states it clearly in black and white. We're done. Standing nearby, Brian saw Alyssa's wrist reddened from Eddie's grip, his eyes filled with heartache. Brian shielded Alyssa behind him and raised his gaze to meet Eddie. Mr. Eddie, you and Alyssa are already divorced. Now Alyssa is my lawful wife. I must ask Mr. Eddie to show some self-respect. Eddie exuded an icy aura, his words devoid of any warmth. What kind of trash are you, to dare speak to me like this? As he finished speaking, his gaze fell upon Alyssa standing behind Brian. He took a deep breath, suppressing his anger as he asked, Alyssa, are you angry about me and Betty? So you deliberately found a man to fake a marriage at the Civil Affairs Bureau, putting on this act for me to see? You don't have to be like this. Betty's situation was an accident. Come home with me, and I'll explain it to you slowly. As he spoke, Eddie reached out to take Alyssa's hand. He had just reached out when Brian stopped him. Mr. Eddie, control yourself. Eddie was blocked by Brian, and the anger in his chest could no longer be contained. He swung his fist and struck Brian in the face. Brian could have dodged, but fearing he might hurt Alyssa, he took the blow head on. Alyssa supported Brian, shielding him while frowning coldly at Eddie. Eddie, our issues are between us, why drag others into this? With that, Alyssa opened the marriage certificate in her hand and held it out before Eddie. Take a good look at the information above. Do you still think I'm putting on an act with you? Eddie, who had been angry because Alyssa was protecting Brian, was now completely speechless as he stared at the marriage certificate handed to him. The marriage certificate bore a photo and personal details of Alyssa and Brian, with the official embossed seal clearly indicating they were legally married. Eddie kept shaking his head as he looked at the marriage certificate Alyssa had handed him. No, it can't be. Alyssa, you clearly love me. How could you marry someone else? This must be a fake certificate. You're lying to me, aren't you? Eddie gripped Alyssa's shoulders, his eyes locked onto hers, desperately searching for confirmation in her expression, but Alyssa met his gaze firmly, expressionlessly brushing off Eddie's hand, enunciating each word. Eddie, you were the one who proposed an open marriage, have you forgotten? Hearing this, Eddie's heart sank abruptly, his face turning pale. You love me so much. How could you really find someone else? Impossible. Alyssa let out a scornful laugh. Eddie, what makes you think that after betraying me, I'd still stand here like a fool waiting for you to come back? We're done. Go find whoever you want. Just don't come looking for me again. With that, Alyssa took Brian by the hand and walked toward the Porsche parked by the roadside. After they got in, the driver took them to the Bay Villa, Alyssa's residence. Eddie stood rooted to the spot, only snapping out of it when the Porsche had completely vanished from sight. Back in the car, Eddie leaned against the driver's seat, as if all his strength had been drained, a wave of frustration welling up in his heart. If only he had carefully read the agreement when Alyssa asked him to sign it. But now, no matter how much he regretted, he couldn't turn back time. Eddie recalled Alyssa standing beside Brian, who looked noticeably younger than Alyssa. How could Alyssa possibly like him? Yet the memory of Alyssa gazing at Brian with such concern made Eddie feel another surge of irritation. Once upon a time, Alyssa would only show such an expression to him, but now she gives it to someone else. Eddie grew increasingly agitated between his brows the more he thought about it. The phone placed nearby kept ringing with calls and message alerts. As the assistant continuously called, Eddie picked up. Mr. Eddie, the Armstrong family group has terminated all cooperation with us. The company is in chaos now. Please come back quickly. Eddie tightened his grip on the phone. Got it. With that, he hung up and drove straight to the office. Originally, he had planned to find Alyssa and explain. But recalling Alyssa's recent attitude, he decided to handle the company matters first before going to her. He couldn't believe Alyssa would truly move on and marry someone else. Half an hour later, the car stopped at the entrance of the Emanuel family's corporate headquarters. His assistant hurried forward to greet him as he stepped out of the car. Mr. Eddie, many partner companies have learned about your divorce from MS, Alyssa, and are now demanding to terminate their contracts. They're waiting for you in the conference room. Understood. Eddie briefly glanced at the documents his assistant handed him before entering the conference room to negotiate with the business partners. On the other side, Alyssa and Brian arrived at the Bay Villa. After entering the villa, Alyssa pushed Brian onto the sofa, fetched the first aid kit, and applied medicine to his face. Are you stupid? Why didn't you dodge when he hit you? Brian pulled Alyssa's hand over and kissed it. I was afraid he might hurt you. It doesn't hurt now. I'm just not sure if the mark will fade before the wedding. Alyssa froze. Wedding? We're already married. The next step is naturally to hold a wedding ceremony, Brian finished speaking. Then seemed to realize something as he watched Alyssa's stunned expression, cautiously asking, don't you want to have a wedding with me, or do you regret marrying me? Alyssa looked at Brian's gradually reddening eyes and the grievance in his gaze, her heart trembling as she quickly reached up to pat his head, soothing him. I don't regret it, I'm just a bit surprised, and I haven't thought about when to hold the wedding yet. Hearing this, Brian finally relaxed. From the moment you agreed to marry me, I've been thinking if you're not ready yet, we can postpone it. If you don't want a ceremony at all, we won't have one, everything is up to you. Brian spoke these words softly, his gaze at Alyssa filled with sincerity. Alyssa felt scalded by his look and stepped forward to kiss the corner of his lips. You've been preparing for so long, we can't let it go to waste. Let's finish all the pre-wedding preparations first, and once the wounds on your face heal, we'll hold the ceremony, okay? Brian, his eyes instantly lit up upon hearing this. Alright, Alyssa, I must throw you the grandest wedding. As he spoke, Brian hugged Alyssa, nuzzling his head against the crook of her neck and murmuring, it's so wonderful, I've finally married you. After cuddling on the couch for a while, Alyssa's phone rang. It was Mrs. Armstrong calling. And only then did Alyssa belatedly realize she had divorced Eddie without even informing her parents. Mom. You still remember to call me Mom, Mrs. Armstrong said unhappily. Why didn't you tell us about the divorce beforehand? Alyssa, knowing she was in the wrong, quickly apologized to her mother. I'm sorry, Mom, I was afraid you wouldn't agree. So, we're not angry at you for getting divorced. We're upset that you suffered grievances without telling the family. Mr. Armstrong took the phone and said, don't worry about the company matters. After your mother and I finish handling things here in London, we'll come back. You should take it easy for now. Alyssa felt a warm current flow through her heart upon hearing her parents' words. She turned to look at Brian sitting beside her, took his hand, and spoke to her parents on the phone. Mom, Dad, remember to come back to the country in a month for my wedding. I'm getting married. What? Alyssa briefly explained the situation to her parents, saying she would provide more details when they returned. Mr. Armstrong, Mrs. Armstrong immediately decided to book flights for the next day to return home. Brian, upon hearing that Mr. Armstrong, Mrs. Armstrong were coming back, promptly declared, I'll make sure to put my best foot forward and win their approval as soon as possible. Don't worry, my parents are very easygoing, Alyssa reassured him. The next day, the two of them went to the airport together to pick up the arrivals. Mr. Armstrong, Mrs. Armstrong initially greeted Brian with lukewarm indifference, but their attitude gradually softened during their subsequent interactions with him. Brian's parents divorced early and started new families. When he turned 18, they gave him a final living allowance before cutting off all contact completely. He had long lost touch with relatives on both sides, so Brian's South wedding only included close friends and colleagues he got along with at the airline. A month passed in the blink of an eye. The wedding venue was set at Whale Bay Beach, entirely decorated according to Alyssa's preferences. Personally designed and planned by Brian, their wedding only invited close friends and family, simple yet far from ordinary. On the wedding day, the Armstrong family's corporate Twitter account posted Alyssa and Brian's wedding photos with a caption, "Congratulations to the young lady on finding her perfect match. May you enjoy a harmonious union for 100 years. In the office handling documents, Eddie saw this Twitter post and without a second thought, immediately drove to Alyssa's wedding venue. When he arrived, he saw Alyssa and Brian on the water platform, having just exchanged rings and embracing each other. No, Alyssa, you can't marry him, Eddie shouted as he tried to rush past the gauze curtains toward the water platform. But the moment he moved, he was stopped by the bodyguards Alyssa had arranged in advance. Mr. Eddie, this is a wedding venue. Please don't cause any trouble. Eddie struggled desperately, yelling, "Let me go. Alyssa can't marry him. I never agreed to the divorce." 6 burly bodyguards paid no heed to his shouts, forcibly removing him from the wedding venue and taking him to the presidential suite of Whale Bay Hotel. Over the past month, Eddie had been overwhelmed by corporate affairs. He originally planned to settle matters before explaining things to Alyssa, but unexpected issues kept piling up endlessly. By the time he regained his senses, a whole month had passed. When he tried to find Alyssa again, he received news of her marriage instead. Initially, Eddie was absolutely certain that Alyssa's mention of getting married that day was just a lie after all, No one could compare to the lifelong bond they'd shared since childhood. He also didn't believe Alyssa could fall in love with someone else in such a short time, but when he saw the two embracing on the Armstrong family's Twitter and wedding water terrace, Eddie's originally suspended heart completely sank. The Armstrong family conglomerate wouldn't joke about their heir's marriage. Alyssa really married someone else. Eddie opened his phone to find it flooded with congratulatory messages about Alyssa's wedding. Just then, Mrs. Emmanuel's call came through. Eddie had barely answered when Mrs. Emmanuel launched into a furious tirade. "Eddie, what did we agree on? I told you not to let Alyssa find out about that woman you were seeing outside. You swore up and down it would be fine. And now look, Alyssa quietly announced her divorce from you and even cut off the partnership with the Armstrong family. I said I wanted to go ask her for an explanation, but you stopped me, and now, she's already married someone else. And the family business is far from what it used to be. What exactly have you been doing?" Eddie sat on the sofa in the suite, rubbing his temples irritably upon hearing his mother's words. "Mom, the group's business is already getting back on track, so stop worrying, and as for my relationship with Alyssa, I know what I'm doing, just stay out of it." With that, Eddie hung up the phone. The hotel door was locked, and he couldn't get out at all. Calling Alyssa went unanswered. While the bodyguards outside merely said he'd be released once the wedding was over, Eddie took a deep breath to suppress his rising anger, then dialed his assistant's number. "Whale Bay Hotel, top floor presidential suite, bring extra people." "Yes, Mr. Eddie." After hanging up the phone, Eddie sat on the couch waiting for his assistant. In the meantime, he kept refreshing news related to Alyssa's wedding. On the other end, Mrs. Emmanuel was equally furious after Eddie hung up on her. Eddie told her not to interfere, but how could she possibly sit still? She had someone locate Betty's whereabouts and immediately rushed over with her assistant. Mrs. Emmanuel believed that the root of everything was Betty. If it weren't for her, Eddie and Alyssa wouldn't have divorced. The Emmanuel family wouldn't have suffered such a heavy blow, and might have even risen to greater heights. Mrs. Emmanuel recalled the provocative messages Betty had sent to Alyssa that went viral, and her blood boiled with anger. If Betty had kept a lower profile, Alyssa might not have been so ruthless. Mrs. Emmanuel now had a suffocating anger with nowhere to vent, so she had no choice but to go find Betty, maternal and child health hospital. Betty leaned back against the hospital bed, scrolling through her phone, and upon seeing the news of Alyssa's marriage, her mood lifted considerably. Alyssa is married, which means Eddie is mine now, even though I lost the baby. As long as I stay by Eddie's side, I can always get pregnant again. With these thoughts, she placed her left hand on her abdomen, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Half a month ago, Betty underwent surgery after her body had recovered. When she woke up and saw her flat stomach, she cried for a long time. She wanted to see Eddie, but Eddie refused to meet her, just told her to take the money and leave after she's rested. Originally, Betty had given up, planning to leave with the money once she recovered, but after seeing the news of Alyssa's marriage, she changed her mind. Alyssa's marriage meant Eddie was no longer an option for her. As long as she stayed by Eddie's side, Eddie would eventually be moved by her. When that happened, she would become Mrs. Emmanuel and never have to return to that nightmarish mountain village again. Thinking this, Betty couldn't help but laugh out loud. She immediately decided to check out of the hospital and head to the Emmanuel family's company to find Eddie. Before she could make a move, the hospital room door was forcefully pushed open. Mrs. Emmanuel walked in. Betty recognized Mrs. Emmanuel. She had specifically researched her information earlier to curry favor with Eddie. "Auntie, what brings you here?" Betty quickly got out of bed and greeted Mrs. Emmanuel with a smile, but the moment she finished speaking, Mrs. Emmanuel slapped her across the face. "What do you think you are? Being the other woman is bad enough, but how dare you send such disgusting messages to the wife? What are you so proud of? Who gave you the nerve?" Mrs. Emmanuel grew angrier as she spoke and couldn't resist slapping Betty again. Betty covered her face, her eyes red as she looked at Mrs. Emmanuel, but didn't dare to retaliate, swallowing her endless grievances. "Auntie, I'm sorry, I was blinded by my own foolishness. But my feelings for Mr. Eddie are genuine. I truly love him. Auntie, please, for the sake of the child I once carried with Mr. Eddie, let me be with Mr. Eddie, won't you? I promise I'll be filial to you from now on." As she spoke, Betty thudded to her knees before Mrs. Emmanuel. Mrs. Emmanuel merely looked down at her with disdain. "A child? You should be grateful that child was never born. Let me be clear, our Emmanuel family only acknowledges children born from Alyssa's womb. Even if your child had been born, we would never have recognized it. with no family background to speak of, parasitic parents, and a lazy, good-for-nothing brother. How could you ever compare to Alyssa? Right now, immediately record a video apologizing to Alyssa, or else I won't just take back the $5 million Eddie gave you, I'll also hire a lawyer to reclaim every cent he's spent on you. The choice is yours. I want to see that apology video by tonight." With those words, Mrs. Emmanuel turned and left. The hospital room door slammed shut. Only then did Betty snap out of her daze at the sound. A cold sweat broke out on her skin. Mrs. Emmanuel had investigated her thoroughly. If she angered Mrs. Emmanuel, she would undoubtedly be sent back to her parents and forced to return to those days of utter darkness. Betty didn't dare delay, immediately taking out her phone to start recording an apology video. Walvis Bay Beach, after the wedding concluded. Alyssa and Brian saw off the guests before returning to their room to change. After removing the cumbersome wedding attire, Alyssa collapsed exhausted onto the sofa. "I'm exhausted. I'm never having another wedding again." Beside her, Brian heard this and quickly sat down next to her. "You've worked hard, wifey. This is absolutely the last time." Alyssa immediately straightened up upon hearing Brian's term of endearment. "What nonsense are you calling me? We're already married." "Why can't I call you wife?" Brian said, then as if struck by a thought, leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Or, do you not want me to call you wife? Would you prefer I call you sister instead?" Alyssa pushed him away, her ears burning hot. "Don't be so cheeky. I've got some things to take care of. I'll be back soon." Brian replied with a smile. "All right, I'll get cleaned up and wait for you, sister." Alyssa shot him a reproachful glance before turning to leave the room. Rubbing her flushed cheeks as she headed toward the presidential suite where Eddie was confined, the bodyguard opened the door, and Alyssa stepped inside. The previously agitated Eddie instantly lost his temper upon seeing Alyssa, his eyes lighting up. "Alyssa." Eddie quickly stepped forward to stand before Alyssa, initially intending to ask if she was truly married, but the words caught in his throat. The answer was already obvious. There was no need for self-deception. So he changed the question instead. "Alyssa, do you love him?" Alyssa seemed unprepared for Eddie's question. She froze momentarily before meeting his gaze and answered earnestly, "Of course. What about me? Our childhood friendship spanning over 20 years. Have you forgotten all that?" Eddie asked with reddened eyes. He had never imagined separating from Alyssa, even after finding someone else. His heart always remained with Alyssa. The one he truly loved was always Alyssa. And this never changed. He was also certain that Alyssa would always love him, would always wait for him right where she stood. When he initially proposed an open marriage, he had anticipated that Alyssa wouldn't accept it and wouldn't seek others, which was why he made that suggestion. But now, it seems that's not the case. Alyssa watched as Eddie's eyes grew increasingly red, her heart sinking. Eddie had occupied the first half of her life, participating in every important milestone. Wounds may heal, but the pain lingers, especially when she had loved Eddie for so many years. "Eddie, so you still remember our 20 years of friendship? Then why did you betray me? Have you forgotten what you promised when you proposed to me? You said you'd love me forever, that you'd never make me sad, that you'd always stay by my side. Eddie, your forever was so short." Hearing this, Eddie's eyes flickered as he lowered his gaze to conceal the gloom within, letting out a self-deprecating smile while murmuring, "Yeah, what right do I have to question you? After all, I was the one who..." Alyssa averted her gaze from Eddie and spoke, "We're already divorced. There's nothing between us anymore. The Armstrong Families Corporation will no longer collaborate with the Emmanuel Families Group in the future. And I have nothing more to say to you. The only reason I had the bodyguards detain you here was to prevent you from disrupting my wedding. Now that it's over, you may leave." As the words fell, Alyssa pushed open the door and turned to leave. Eddie watched Alyssa's retreating figure, his heart suddenly hollow. Without thinking, he quickly stepped forward and grabbed Alyssa's wrist. "Alyssa, don't go, stay with me a little longer, okay?" His tone was utterly pleading. His eyes full of desperation, Alyssa paused mid-step, then after a moment, brushed off Eddie's hand. Meanwhile, Eddie's assistant hurried over, followed by several bodyguards. Alyssa turned to face Eddie and spoke slowly. "Mr. Eddie, your assistant is here to pick you up. Please go back now." Eddie detected the distance in Alyssa's tone, suppressed the stabbing pain in his heart, and stepped toward the door. As he passed by Alyssa, he whispered in a voice only the two of them could hear. "Alyssa, the one I've always loved is you. I never wanted us to part, and I can't believe you'd give up on all these years of our bond so quickly. Betraying you was my mistake. Alyssa, I'll win you back, make up for the hurt I caused. Just like before, I'll show you my heart and bring you back to me." Eddie finished speaking and walked out the door. leaving Whale Bay Hotel with his assistant. Only when Eddie and his group had completely disappeared from sight did Alyssa leave the room and return to the bridal chamber she shared with Brian. The words Eddie had whispered in her ear moments ago held no weight in her heart. The damage was done, no amount of mending could turn back time. From the moment she learned of Eddie's betrayal, she and Eddie were fated never to return to what they once were. The reason for coming to see Eddie was to clear things up with him and make him stop bothering her in the future. She knew Eddie well enough to understand that his words weren't entirely out of regret, but more from unwillingness to accept the situation. He couldn't bear that Alyssa, who once had eyes only for him, now no longer saw him, nor could he accept her being with another man. In Eddie's view, she should have stayed right where she was, waiting for him, ready to forgive him no matter how grave his mistakes, because she loved him. But that Alyssa who loved Eddie with all her heart had already died inside the moment Eddie uttered the words open marriage. Snapping back to reality, Alyssa stood before the hotel's honeymoon suite door. Now, it was time for her to move forward. Alyssa pushed open the door and saw Brian sitting on the living room sofa, looking at her with a pitiful expression. "If you hadn't come back soon, I would have gone out to look for you." What kind of wife leaves her husband alone at home right after getting married? Alyssa closed the door and walked over to Brian with a smile, pinching his ear playfully. "I'm back now, aren't I? I just went to see Eddie. We had a clear talk and I told him not to disturb our lives anymore." Brian pressed his index finger against Alyssa's lips, silencing her unfinished words. He gently stroked Alyssa's soft lips with his fingertip, his voice hoarse as he whispered, "Sister, today is our joyous wedding day. I don't want to hear another's name from your lips." With those words, Brian stood up and swept Alyssa into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom. The wedding bed was strewn with petals carefully arranged by Brian. He gently placed Alyssa at the center of the petals, leaning over her with desire burning in his eyes. "Sister, I've been waiting for you for so long." Brian's gaze was scorching. As if he wanted to devour Alyssa whole, Alyssa met his gaze filled with unmistakable desire, her heartbeat inexplicably quickening, the tips of her ears turning red enough to bleed. Momentarily at a loss for words, she casually grabbed a handful of petals beneath her. "When did you prepare these?" "I had no idea." Brian reached out and took Alyssa's hand, intertwining their fingers as the rose petals grew warm between their palms. "Sister, now is not the time for that." With that, before Alyssa could react, Brian leaned down and captured Alyssa's lips, raising his hand to grip her wrists and pinning them above her head. The electric curtains slowly drew shut, sealing away the intimate scene within. Eddie went straight back to the company after leaving Whale Bay Hotel. Upon entering the office, he unexpectedly saw Mrs. Emmanuel sitting on the sofa. "Mom, what brings you here?" Mrs. Emmanuel pointed at the wedding news of Alyssa on her phone and said sharply, "Eddie, this is what you called her being unable to live without you. Now she's married to someone else. The Armstrong family has stopped collaborating with us, and the group is in decline. Are you satisfied now?" "What's so great about that, Betty? She can't compare to Alyssa in looks or family background." Yet she even had the audacity to send provocative messages to Alyssa. "If you're going to find someone, at least pick someone with brains." Alyssa sponsored her education, and she repays kindness with betrayal. What on earth is there to like about such a person? Hurry up and resolve the matter with Betty, then remarry Alyssa and continue collaborating with the Armstrong family. Eddie listened to his mother's words, his brows furrowing deeply. "Mom, stop talking. I can handle my own affairs. Don't bring up Betty again. It was just an accident, and there's nothing between us anymore." Mrs. Emmanuel persisted relentlessly. "I don't care what happens to Betty in the future, but you must resolve things with Alyssa as soon as possible. I've already had Betty record an apology video for Alyssa. Once Alyssa watches it and cools down, you go and apologize to her. I've also looked into the man she married. He has no background, just an ordinary person who can't compare to you at all, and isn't worthy of Alyssa. They're probably just fooling around. If you say a few sweet words to Alyssa, she'll definitely soften and forgive you." Eddie felt nothing but exhaustion upon hearing this. "I have a meeting soon. Let the driver take you home." Without waiting for Mrs. Emmanuel's response, Eddie called his assistant to escort Mrs. Emmanuel out of the company. "Fine. You've grown your wings and won't listen to me anymore. Just remember, if you don't settle this matter properly, don't you dare come back to the old house to see me." With these words, Mrs. Emmanuel stormed out of the office in a rage. Eddie leaned back in his chair, exhaustion written across his brow. Not long after, his phone buzzed with a news notification. It is Betty's recorded apology video. In the video, Betty tearfully apologizes, saying she is sorry to Alyssa. admitting she was wrong, and begging for Alyssa's forgiveness. She even specifically tagged Alyssa's account. Betty cried pitifully. But netizens were not buying it. What were you thinking when you sent those provocative messages? How dare you ask Alyssa for forgiveness? You're not admitting you're wrong, you're just afraid of losing money, that's why you're apologizing. As I've said before, Eddie was truly blind. He didn't cherish Alyssa, who grew up with him, and insisted on seeking others outside. Now his reputation is ruined by Betty, and the group's development is far from what it used to be. He totally deserves it, because of Betty's apology video. The Emanuel family's recently restored image has collapsed again. Upon seeing this, Mrs. Emanuel, who had returned to the old mansion, was so angry that she collapsed. Eddie immediately instructed the PR department to launch emergency damage control to salvage the group's reputation. By the time everything was handled, it was already 1 a.m. Eddie signed the last document, closed the folder, and instinctively lifted his gaze toward the sofa. In the past, whenever he worked overtime at the company, no matter how late, Alyssa would always come to keep him company. Even when drowsy to the point of delirium, she refused to leave, stubbornly waiting for him to finish work so they could go home together. Every time he finished work and looked up, he would see Alyssa asleep on the couch. No matter how exhausted he was, just seeing Alyssa would instantly wash away all his fatigue. But now, the couch stood empty, and the entire office was eerily quiet, thinking of that cold, unwelcoming home. Eddie had even less desire to return. He got up and walked into the lounge. The lounge still contained items Alyssa had added during her stays: blankets, throw pillows, scented candles, and some clothes. Eddie had spent most of the past month living in the lounge. It was filled with Alyssa's presence. Breathing in her familiar scent at least made him feel like Alyssa was still by his side. Eddie fell asleep slowly, breathing in the familiar scent on the pillow. The next day, Eddie woke up to find it was already 10 a.m. Thanks to timely PR, yesterday's Betty's apology video didn't cause much impact on the Emanuel family's corporation. With most documents already handled, Eddie decided to go find Alyssa. He said he wanted to win her back, so of course he had to show his sincerity. On the way to the hotel, Eddie saw entertainment news reporting that Alyssa had been spotted at the airport with a man. Without a second thought, he quickly asked the driver to turn around and head to the airport. When he arrived at the airport, Alyssa was going through security. Eddie quickly called out to stop her. "Alyssa, wait." As she was going through security, Alyssa heard someone call her name and instinctively turned to look. She saw Eddie looking at her with an anxious expression. Unwilling to make a scene in public, Alyssa took out her phone and called him instead. His phone rang, and upon seeing the caller ID, he quickly answered. "Alyssa, where are you going?" Alyssa looked at Eddie across the crowd. "Eddie, I'm going on my honeymoon. If you have something to say, just say it." "Honeymoon? Where to?" Eddie hurriedly pressed. Alyssa glanced at the time on her phone and frowned. "None of your business, if you've got nothing else. I'm hanging up, I have a flight to catch." With that, Alyssa ended the call, averted her gaze, and walked into the departure lounge with Brian. Eddie, seeing this, quickly called his assistant to investigate Alyssa's honeymoon destination. Before he could finish speaking, his assistant spoke up first. "Mr. Eddie, there's a problem with a project at the New Zealand branch. You need to come back immediately." "Understood." With the group company just getting back on track, they couldn't afford any more mishaps now. Eddie had no choice but to set aside personal matters and return to handle work at the company. On the other side, in the airport lounge, Alyssa leaned against Brian's shoulder with her eyes closed, resting. When it was time to board, Alyssa stood up and pulled a muscle in her side, the sharp pain making her gasp. Brian quickly steadied her, his eyes filled with concern. "Sorry baby, I'll be gentler next time." Hearing this, Alyssa lightly hit him and scolded, "Stop talking about it." Brian obediently kept quiet as they found their seats in first class. Alyssa, exhausted from the previous night, put on her eye mask and began to rest as soon as they boarded. The first stop of their honeymoon was set in Italy. 15 hours later, the plane landed at Milan Malpensa Airport. Alyssa only fully woke up after boarding the hotel shuttle. Upon arriving at the hotel, Alyssa immediately collapsed onto the large bed. "Brian, I'm exhausted." Brian set down his luggage, sat on the bed beside her, and gently massaged her sore muscles. "Dinner will be delivered soon, rest well today. And tomorrow I'll take you to some lesser-known spots." Hearing this, Alyssa suddenly perked up with interest. "Lesser-known? Did you discover them yourself, or were they recommended by locals?" "They're places I found on my own that I thought had beautiful scenery. During previous vacations, I loved traveling and would record different landscapes. thinking I'd bring my loved one to see them someday. I thought this wish would never come true, but thankfully you're here." As he spoke, Brian leaned down to kiss Alyssa's forehead. Alyssa lay on the hotel bed, eyes closed as she enjoyed Brian's massage. The room was scented with her favorite incense, and she gradually relaxed completely. Before she knew it, she had fallen fast asleep. Meanwhile, in Shenzhen, Eddie returned to the company and, without a moment's rest, immediately held a meeting to address the project for the New Zealand branch. By the time he finished, it was already 10 a.m. the next morning. Having not slept all night, Eddie felt nothing but dizziness and a throbbing headache. He got up to rest in the lounge for a while, but the next moment, his vision went dark, and he collapsed to the ground unconscious. The assistant working outside heard the noise and hurriedly pushed the door open, only to find Eddie lying unconscious. Immediately calling for an ambulance, they rushed him to the hospital. In the hospital room, Mrs. Emmanuel, upon receiving the news, hurried to the hospital. Learning it was just exhaustion, she finally relaxed. Mrs. Emmanuel kept vigil by Eddie's bedside and called Mr. Emmanuel, who was on a business trip in the UK, to reassure him that all was well. 2 hours later, Eddie woke from his coma. "Eddie, how are you feeling? Is there anywhere that still hurts?" Mrs. Emmanuel asked with concern. Eddie shook his head. "I'm fine. Don't worry." Mrs. Emmanuel gazed at the pale-faced Eddie lying on the hospital bed, her eyes filled with heartache as her tone softened. "Eddie, I shouldn't have pushed you so hard. Your assistant told me everything about the project. If it's truly too difficult, just let it go. Your health comes first." "Mom, don't worry. I just haven't been resting well lately. I'm fine now. You should go home." Mrs. Emmanuel had intended to wait until Eddie was discharged, but after Eddie repeatedly insisted she didn't need to stay, she reluctantly gave in, offering a final round of reminders before leaving. After Mrs. Emmanuel left, the ward instantly fell silent. Eddie had been working non-stop for over a month, with hardly any time to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind was filled with images of Alyssa. Eddie took out his phone, opened Alyssa's WeChat, and sent her a message. "Are you there?" The moment the message was sent, the familiar red exclamation mark appeared. Alyssa had blocked him. Eddie looked at the glaring red exclamation mark and laughed at himself. He and Alyssa grew up together. How could he not know Alyssa's personality? She had always been straightforward, never one to lie. What was true, and what wasn't. So, her and Brian, they were really together. But he just couldn't accept it. He had only made a small mistake. And now that he had seen the error of his ways, he was ready to commit to Alyssa properly. Yet Alyssa no longer wanted him. He had investigated Brian, just an airline captain with no family background to speak of. Except for that face, there was no way he could provide Alyssa a good life. So he was certain that even if they got married, they wouldn't stay together. Just like him and Betty, their levels of understanding weren't even close, destined to never last. Only Alyssa was truly compatible with him, and only Alyssa could walk with him till the end. Collecting his thoughts, Eddie lay on the hospital bed for a while longer before leaving. Back at the company, Eddie began tackling the remaining work. He had only gotten halfway through when his assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Eddie, Miss Tang is in the lobby and wishes to see you." Eddie paused mid-signature, his brows instantly furrowing. "Don't see her, have security escort her out. And tell them not to let her in again." "Understood, Mr. Eddie." The assistant nodded in acknowledgement before turning to leave. 8 p.m. Eddie signed the last document, blinked his tired eyes, stood up and walked out of the office to the underground parking lot. He got into the back seat of the Porsche and said to the driver, "Back to Guanshangyuan." The driver nodded in acknowledgement and drove towards the Guanshangyuan villa. Eddie hadn't returned to the villa for a long time. Neither he nor Alyssa liked having outsiders at home, so there were no butlers or servants in the villa, only cleaning staff who came periodically. Now that Alyssa was gone, the villa felt even more desolate. Every time he returned to the villa, the endless darkness seemed poised to swallow him whole. If it weren't for the inadequate facilities in the lounge and the fact that he couldn't rest properly, he wouldn't have returned to the villa. An hour later, the Porsche stopped at the villa's entrance. As the driver parked, he noticed someone sitting at the villa's entrance and was startled. "Mr. Eddie, there's someone at the villa's entrance, seated in the back." Eddie slowly opened his eyes and, with the help of the car's headlights, made out the person's appearance. It was Betty. Betty was momentarily blinded by the headlights. As her eyes adjusted to the light, she recognized Eddie's car and felt a surge of joy. Eddie saw Betty, and his brows instantly furrowed with visible irritation. He pushed the car door open and stepped out, walking slowly toward the villa. It was late April, and the night wind was chilly. Betty was only wearing a white short-sleeve shirt and a denim skirt, now shivering from the cold. Upon seeing Eddie, she quickly stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "Eddie, I beat the child and posted the apology video. Now everyone's cursing me. I've got nowhere to go. Can you take me in for the night?" Eddie shook off her hand and said coldly, "Betty, when we were together, I warned you not to provoke Alyssa, who told you to send her those messages. I haven't settled accounts with you yet, and you dare come to me." Eddie's tone was so cold it could freeze ice. Betty couldn't help shivering. I really know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Okay, I really like you. I don't want to be taken back to that village by my parents." "Eddie, didn't you say you liked me too back then? Let's get married, okay? I'll treat you well." Hearing this, Eddie's eyes darkened with anger as he raised his hand and gripped Betty's chin, his fingers tightening relentlessly. "Betty, should I praise you for being naive or for being bold? The compensation you deserved was already transferred to your account. A smart person would have taken the money and left. Yet not only did you stay, but you even dare to think about marrying me, if you didn't want to be taken back by your parents. You should have relied on your own efforts to escape back then, not tried to take a shortcut by seducing me. Alyssa has sponsored so many people, but you're the only one who's achieved nothing. Bother me again, and I'll take back all the compensation I gave you, let you fend for yourself. Now get lost." With that, Eddie shoved Alyssa away without another glance and strode straight into the villa. Betty fell to the ground, her palms scraped raw. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared resentfully at the villa's tightly shut door. She had truly fallen for Eddie. The moment she first laid eyes on him, it was love at first sight. Later, when she discovered he was Alyssa's husband, jealousy drove her to madness. Alyssa helped her escape that hellish home, and at first she was grateful, but gradually, this gratitude turned into jealousy. She envied Alyssa's family background, envied Alyssa's beauty, and even envied Alyssa. Why did she have such a handsome, wealthy, and devoted husband? Upon seeing Eddie, Betty's first thought was to win him over. She wanted to make Alyssa jealous of her too, so she began pretending to be innocent, frequently appearing by Eddie's side. Eddie slowly became drawn to her, and eventually, it was only natural that she and Eddie ended up together. After Eddie got together with her, Betty was quite smug, sighing inwardly countless times. So what if Alyssa was a rich heiress? She still couldn't keep her own husband. Eddie treated her better and better, buying her whatever she wanted. Slowly, she lost herself in this life of luxury and indulgence, her desires growing ever larger. After Alyssa caught her with Eddie, she was on edge for a while. But when she realized Alyssa didn't do anything to her, she became even more brazen. She began deliberately sending provocative messages to Alyssa, trying to force her to divorce Eddie so she could marry Eddie herself. But she was thinking too simply. Wealthy families would never marry a parasitic flower with no family background, let alone one dragging along a whole bunch of burdens. Betty sat on the cold ground, the chilly wind blowing over her, making her shiver uncontrollably. She had come to see Eddie today, deliberately wearing the same clothes she had on during their first meeting, hoping to remind Eddie of their shared past and evoke his pity for her. But Eddie only looked at her with disgust in his eyes. Betty refused to give up. She stood up, intending to knock on the villa's door, but before she could act, the security guards of the Guanshanuan Villa district stopped her. "I'm sorry, but please stop harassing our residents. You need to leave." Betty quickly defended herself. "I'm a friend of the homeowner here. You can't make me leave." The security guard paid no attention to Betty's excuses and forcibly escorted her away. Standing behind the floor-to-ceiling window on the villa's second floor, Eddie watched as Betty was taken away before turning to enter the bedroom. As soon as he entered the villa, he called the security guards to have Betty kicked out and instructed the property management to never allow her entry again. Betty left, and the villa's courtyard instantly returned to silence. Eddie didn't return to the master bedroom but instead walked into what was once Alyssa's bedroom. All traces of Alyssa in the bedroom were gone. Eddie sat on the bed, running his hand over the blanket. "Alyssa, how cruel of you to leave me with nothing at all." As he spoke, Eddie felt his throat tightening, his heart wrenching with pain, and his vision blurring. A tear rolled down his cheek and fell onto the quilt, leaving a damp stain. Slowly, the stain grew larger. Eddie could no longer hold back. Lying on the bed where Alyssa once slept, he clutched the quilt tightly and burst into tears. "Alyssa, I was wrong. Please don't leave me. Come back." In the past, whenever he made Alyssa angry and couldn't coax her, just crying would make Alyssa soften and forgive him. But now, after saying these words, he waited in vain for any response. Only the sound of his sobs remained in the bedroom. After who knows how long, Eddie slowly fell asleep. But this sleep brought him no peace, for his dreams were filled with scenes of him and Alyssa together in the past, from babbling as a child to stepping into school, then becoming passionate lovers who entered marriage. Everything went smoothly until Betty appeared. Eddie watched his dream self do many things that hurt Alyssa, all for Betty. He desperately tried to stop his dream self from hurting Alyssa, but it was all in vain. He could only watch helplessly as Alyssa gradually grew disappointed in him, withdrew her love, and ultimately left for good. Alyssa, no, don't leave me. Eddie jolted awake, the pillow beneath him already half soaked. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the room. Eddie gazed at the dazzling light on the floor, lost in thought. In the past, Alyssa would linger in bed after waking in his arms, pulling him to watch the sunlight filtering into the room together. Eddie had once asked her why she loved sunlight so much. Alyssa shook her head with a smile at the time. It's not the sunlight I love, but the person lying beside me, watching it with me. Eddie, I love you. Eddie looked at the sunlight streaming into the room and laughed at himself. He had lost Alyssa, who loved him. Eddie changed the damp sheets and tossed them into the washing machine. He didn't want Alyssa's things to be touched by others. So he didn't call for cleaning services and chose to do it himself. At the very least, he could still deceive himself into believing that as long as the bedroom remained unchanged, Alyssa would return. Eddie changed to a new set of bedsheets, the ones Alyssa had left in the master bedroom. Ever since Alyssa caught him with Betty, she had never set foot in the master bedroom again. So, the master bedroom still contains some things Alyssa had forgotten and left behind. At that moment, the villa's doorbell rang. Eddie went downstairs to answer the door. A worker stood at the entrance and cautiously asked, "Mr. Eddie, you previously hired us to renovate the garden and mentioned wanting to plant flowers once it was done. I called you earlier, but you didn't answer, so I had to come to the villa to find you. I just wanted to ask, are you still planning to plant the flowers?" As the worker asked this, he felt extremely nervous. Eddie had offered such a high price that he really didn't want to miss this lucrative opportunity. Eddie recalled telling Alyssa that he would replant the lisianthus she loved in the garden, but lately, he'd been swamped with work and completely forgotten about it, only remembering when he saw the workers now. "Plant them. I want you to buy the seeds. Have them planted tomorrow." "Yes, Mr. Eddie. We'll get right on it while you attend to your work." After saying this, the worker hurried away. As if afraid Eddie would change his mind, after the worker left, Eddie called his assistant, "Hire a highly skilled villa butler. Then, find out Alyssa's current location." "Yes, Mr. Eddie, I'll get right on it." The villa is now only occupied by Eddie himself, and someone is always needed to manage the household when he's away. The assistant worked quickly and soon found a housekeeper. The housekeeper's surname is Lee, highly professional, and will start working at the villa the day after passing the interview. The assistant then sent Alyssa's current location to Eddie's phone, Florence. Eddie jotted down the address, took a quick shower, changed clothes, and headed to the office. After arriving at the office, Eddie called for his assistant. "Sort out the documents that need urgent attention. I'll sign them now. The rest can wait until I return." The assistant looked surprised but quickly realized Eddie was going to find Alyssa. "Understood, Mr. Eddie." The assistant nodded in acknowledgement before turning to leave the office. There were many documents to sign, and Eddie spent a whole week at the company getting them all organized. When he returned to the villa, the workers had already planted all the flowers, now waiting for them to sprout and bloom. During this time, Alyssa had already left Florence and flown to Tahiti. Eddie had his assistant book a flight to Tahiti and asked the housekeeper to pack his luggage. Once everything was ready, the driver took him to the airport. Since he had decided to win Alyssa back, he naturally had to show his determination. Alyssa might have someone new in her life, but he was still confident he could win her back. On the other side, Moruya Island, Alyssa lay on the beach chair, feeling the gentle sea breeze. Brian sat beside her applying sunscreen. During their last trip to Italy, Alyssa had a wonderful time. Brian truly took her to many breathtaking scenic spots. Alyssa loves watching the sea, so the couple came to Tahiti. "Baby, I just checked, the water temperature is perfect for diving. Want to go together later?" "Sure." Alyssa set down her lemon tea and pulled Brian, who was applying sunscreen on her, to sit beside her. "Brian, you've been accommodating me this whole trip, but you really don't have to. We're married now, partners for the future. I know you're worried about the hurt from my past relationship and want to make me happy, but Brian, I want you to be happy too." Brian heard Alyssa's words, his eyelashes fluttering slightly as warmth surged through his heart. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to him after his parents' divorce. "Alyssa, thank you." Brian held Alyssa's hand, his eyes filled with tenderness. Alyssa gave Brian's hand a gentle squeeze and smiled. We're husband and wife, no need for thanks. Weren't we going scuba diving? Let's go. Okay. Under the guidance of professional staff, the two put on their diving gear and went into the sea for snorkeling. Rainbow trout, rays, and humphead wrasses. They were still reluctant to leave when they came ashore. Alyssa returned to the hotel, took a shower, changed into fresh and clean clothes, and said to Brian while drying her hair, "That was so much fun. I haven't felt this relaxed in ages." Brian took the towel from Alyssa and helped her dry her hair. "Tomorrow we're going to Taikau Island. The pink sand beach there is famous. You'll definitely love it." With that, Brian picked up the hairdryer nearby and began drying her hair. After changing clothes, the two rested in the hotel for a while before heading out. By the time they went out again, it was already dusk. Hand in hand, strolling along the seaside, the sea breeze caressing their faces, Alyssa squinted comfortably. What a refreshing sea breeze. The sea breeze lifted Alyssa's chestnut curls, the afterglow spilling over her, casting a soft glow around her. Brian paused in his steps, gazing at her intently. When Alyssa first met Brian, he was stunned by her beauty, and it's still the same now. Alyssa saw him standing still and looked at him in confusion. What's wrong? Tired? No. Brian stepped forward, leaned down to kiss Alyssa's cheek. My wife is so beautiful. Alyssa blushed faintly before standing on her tiptoes to embrace Brian, planting a firm kiss on his lips. My husband is handsome too. The couple exchanged a knowing smile before continuing their hand-in-hand stroll along the beach. Brian had first met Alyssa 12 years ago, but back then Alyssa had been with Eddie. Moreover, everyone said they were childhood sweethearts, a match made in heaven. Brian hid his secret admiration deep in his heart, until 6 months ago. When they met again at the airport, at that time, Alyssa had just learned about Eddie and Betty. Her mind was in turmoil, and not wanting to see them, she decided to go abroad to clear her head. Brian was on vacation at the time and decided to travel abroad. The two were seated right next to each other. Alyssa sat on the plane, thinking about how Eddie had betrayed her. Her heart ached, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Brian noticed and handed her a pack of tissues. Thank you. You're welcome. Brian originally wanted to say something more to Alyssa, but seeing how heartbroken she was, he didn't dare disturb her and simply kept a quiet watch over her emotions. Alyssa didn't know him, as they had never crossed paths before. After disembarking, the two went their separate ways. Yet later, they unexpectedly ran into each other at several tourist spots. Alyssa felt her mood lift considerably upon seeing the beautiful scenery. So she took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Brian. There aren't truly so many chance encounters in this world, they're all deliberate schemes by those with intentions. Brian had never forgotten Alyssa. He had never been in a relationship before. When girls had pursued him in the past, he turned them all down, not because they weren't good enough, but simply because he felt nothing for them. Just when he thought he was destined to grow old alone, Alyssa reappeared, after years apart. Brian still had feelings for Alyssa, but due to his parents' influence, he never dared to take that step. Later, when he learned Alyssa had gotten married, he was gloomy for days. Upon reflection, Alyssa was so outstanding. Even if she hadn't married, she likely had a boyfriend. He had been presumptuous. Although they had exchanged contact information, they didn't stay in touch much afterward. Until a month later, Brian ran into Alyssa at the airport again. Brian, dressed in his pilot uniform, couldn't help but smile when he saw Alyssa. Alyssa spotted him too and waved hello across the crowd. From that day on, the two began contacting each other more frequently, until one evening when they were having dinner together, Alyssa drank heavily and burst into tears. Brian felt heartbroken. He knew Alyssa was married, yet he couldn't help getting closer to her. He knew Alyssa was crying so bitterly, most likely because of her husband, at that moment. Brian didn't want to care about anything else. He only knew he couldn't bear to see Alyssa so heartbroken. Alyssa, be with me, Brian confessed, finally speaking the love he hadn't dared to voice 12 years ago. Alyssa froze upon hearing Brian's words, taking a long moment to process them. She wiped away her tears, thought for a long time, and finally a look of relief spread across her face. All right, let's be together. After that night, they were officially together. As his thoughts returned to the present, Brian gazed at Alyssa walking beside him with a radiant smile, his eyes filled with unshakable tenderness. He finally got his wish. As dusk fell, the two returned to the Water Villa Hotel. The hotel arranged a barbecue for the evening. Alyssa sat on a beach chair, watching tourists dancing around the bonfire not far away. The firelight reflected on their bodies, warming them with its cozy heat. Brian handed the freshly grilled beef to Alyssa. How does it taste? Alyssa took the plate, took a big bite. nodded in satisfaction, and praised generously. Delicious. Brian smiled with his eyes. What else would you like, honey? I'll grill it for you. I'd like shrimp and squid. Thank you, darling, Alyssa said, then put down her plate, stood up and kissed Brian on the cheek. Suddenly, an angry shout came from behind the two of them. Alyssa, what are you doing? Alyssa turned towards the voice and saw Eddie walking towards her with a dark expression. Eddie, what are you doing here? Eddie stepped forward and pulled Alyssa to his side, glaring coldly at Brian. Stay away from her. Brian's previously gentle expression darkened instantly. Mr. Eddie, let me remind you, she's my lawful wife. The one who should stay away seems to be you. Being forcibly pulled to his side by Eddie, Alyssa frowned, shook off Eddie's hand, and returned to Brian's side, staring at him expressionlessly. Eddie, we're done. Brian is my husband now. Mind your own business. Eddie grew increasingly grim-faced as he watched the pair standing together, taking a deep breath to suppress the fury rising in his chest. Alyssa, I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to see you. You've seen me. Now you can leave, Alyssa replied mercilessly. Eddie had argued and given Alyssa the silent treatment before, but he had never heard Alyssa speak to him in such a tone. Alyssa, I know you're still angry with me. Let's both cool off tonight, and I'll come find you tomorrow. With that, Eddie turned and left, returning to the hotel. After Eddie left, Alyssa let out a cold snort, her earlier good mood instantly vanishing. Brian gently stroked her hair and coaxed in a soft voice. Don't want to see him. Should we leave and go back home first? We can come again next time. Alyssa shook her head in refusal. No, why should I leave just because he's here? Besides, this is our honeymoon. I don't want it to end so abruptly. Don't worry, I won't let him affect me. Let him do whatever he wants. We'll enjoy ourselves as planned and not let him ruin our time. All right, I'll listen to whatever my wife says. The couple continued their barbecue on the beach, not leaving until they'd thoroughly enjoyed themselves. The next day, after getting up and having breakfast, the two took a boat to Tychow Island. Not long after they boarded the ship, Eddie came aboard as well. Alyssa put on her sunglasses, leaned into Brian's arms, and turned to watch the seagulls fishing in the air. Eddie didn't approach to strike up a conversation, just sat quietly to the side. Before long, the boat arrived at Tychow Island. Alyssa and Brian disembarked, handed their luggage to the staff, and headed to the pink sand beach. Eddie had been following the two of them ever since disembarking. Alyssa ignored the trailing Eddie and discussed their next steps with Brian. After all, Eddie would find out wherever they went, so they might as well openly say it outright. Alyssa linked arms with Brian and coquettishly said, Brian, last time we didn't get to fully enjoy snorkeling. I still want to go. Brian nodded with an indulgent smile. All right, the locals also catch fish and grill them on the spot. Let's try that later and have some fresh grilled fish. What do you say? Great. Then let's hurry up and go. As the words fell, Alyssa pulled Brian and quickened their pace toward the seaside. Eddie was completely ignored by Alyssa. Watching Alyssa act coquettishly with Brian, his heart ached with each throbbing pain. It used to be him standing beside Alyssa, listening to her playful whines. In just a few short months, that person had become someone else. A wave of pain washed over his heart. Eddie composed himself and quickened his pace to catch up with the pair. The pink beach isn't entirely pink, just brick red, but under the sunlight, it takes on a rosy hue. Brian applied sunscreen on Alyssa before letting her go play. Alyssa walked barefoot on the beach, the fine sand slipping between her toes. Utterly delightful. Just then, Eddie stepped in front of Alyssa and placed a sun hat on her head. The sun at the beach is harsh. Even with sunscreen, you can still get burned. Better wear the hat. Alyssa initially wanted to take it off, but after glancing at her exposed skin, she decided not to fight herself over it. Thank you. With that said, he ran to the other side to find Brian. After playing for a while, Alyssa and Brian started preparing to go snorkeling in the sea. Eddie didn't follow this time, just sat quietly on the beach chair, waiting. He really didn't want to see Alyssa being so intimate with another man. Half an hour later, the two came ashore. After going ashore, they changed clothes in the nearby changing room and prepared to go fishing again, this time to grill the fish. Alyssa gave up after failing to catch any fish several times and sat under the sunshade watching Brian fish. Eddie remembered that Alyssa had mentioned wanting to eat grilled fish earlier, so he also started wading into the sea to catch some. Two men competed to show off in front of Alyssa, and before long, both their buckets were filled with fish. Several foreigners saw the fish in their buckets and expressed admiration. Alyssa looked at the fish in the buckets, thought for a moment, and said to them, "We've caught so many we can't eat them all. Would you like to take some?" The group quickly expressed their gratitude. Eddie quickly grabbed Brian's bucket and handed it to them. These are all yours now. After expressing their gratitude, the group took the fish and turned to leave. Once they were gone, Alyssa glared angrily at Eddie. Eddie, this is the fish Brian caught. Why didn't you give her your own? Brian put his arm around Alyssa's shoulder and comforted her softly. It's fine, I'll catch more later. Eddie hurried forward and eagerly presented the fish he had caught to Alyssa. The fish he caught, you don't even like eating them. Have mine instead, these are all your favorites. Alyssa glanced at the fish in the bucket, then at Brian's sunburned arms. Fine, let it be this time, Eddie. But don't you dare act on your own again. Eddie heard Alyssa relent and quickly agreed. Okay, I won't do it next time. I'll go have someone prepare the ingredients for grilled fish. Alyssa pulled Brian under the sunshade and applied sunburn ointment to him. Eddie, seeing this, also extended his sunburned arm toward Alyssa, his tone carrying a hint of grievance. Alyssa, my arm got sunburned too. Alyssa pulled another tube of sunburn ointment from her bag and placed it in front of Eddie. Apply it yourself, but I just strained my muscles while catching fish and can't lift my arm now, Eddie pleaded cautiously, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation. Alyssa wasn't buying it, replying coldly, then go find someone else. Eddie choked up, catching the implication in Alyssa's words. A flicker of desolation flashed through his eyes as he picked up the ointment and sat aside, applying it silently. Brian noticed Alyssa's furrowed brows and reached out to gently tap them. Sweetheart, you've already applied enough. No need for more. Alyssa finally snapped out of it, looking at the thick layer of ointment on Brian's arm before speaking up. Sorry, I was spacing out just now. Brian raised his hands to cup her face, his fingertips gently caressing her cheeks. Honey, please don't get distracted by other men anymore. I'll really get jealous. Alyssa had indeed been affected by Eddie and thus lost focus. Knowing she was in the wrong, she leaned in and kissed Brian. All right, I won't do it again. Let's rest for a while and get ready to grill the fish. You can eat more later since he gave your fish away. We'll just finish all the fish he caught. Okay, whatever you say. Brian smiled adoringly. Though they spoke softly, their words were clearly heard by Eddie, who was sitting not far away. When he saw Alyssa initiate a kiss with Brian, his heart felt as if pierced by a sharp sword, shattered into pieces with unbearable pain. Only at this moment did he finally understand Alyssa's fury when she learned about his relationship with Betty. Yet now, he had absolutely no standing to approach Alyssa and demand they separate. After all, he was merely the ex-husband now, while Brian was Alyssa's lawful husband. Alyssa and Brian were already processing the sea fish, chatting and laughing, which made Eddie feel a pang of envy. The island had professional chefs who could help, but they still wanted to do it themselves. Eddie applied some sunburn ointment, then got up and walked over to join them, helping with the fish. An hour later, Brian set up the grill and started barbecuing the fish. The grill was large. Brian and Eddie each took one side to start cooking. Alyssa brought some vegetables and meat provided by the hotel and handed them to Brian. The beef you grilled last time was delicious. I want to have it again. Brian took the plate. All right, go rest over there. I'll bring it to you when it's ready. Alyssa sat on the beach chair sunbathing while waiting for the barbecue. In front of the grill, Eddie put down the fish in his hand and looked at Brian standing beside him. Brian, if you know what's good for you, leave Alyssa as soon as possible. You're not right for her. Brian chuckled at the words, continuing to flip the meat on the grill. Only the foot knows if the shoe fits. Mr. Eddie. As for me and Alyssa, there's no need for her ex-husband to worry about it. Eddie's face darkened. Alyssa is the heiress of the Armstrong family conglomerate. You're just a pilot. What makes you think you're suitable for Alyssa? You've known each other for less than a year. You don't even understand each other. Eddie paused before continuing. Alyssa is only with you to spite me. Once she cools off, she'll naturally return to me. By then, you'll be the one left embarrassed. So why not leave now? I can give you a sum of money that'll ensure you never have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your life. Brian only turned to look at Eddie after hearing these final words. Mr. Eddie, even if I were to part ways with Alyssa, I'd need to hear it from her own lips that she no longer loves me and chooses to leave. Otherwise, I won't walk away from Alyssa. I admit, I'm indeed not as wealthy as you, nor can I provide Alyssa with such a comfortable life, but I'll do my best to treat her well, and most importantly, I'll never betray her for another woman. Eddie's expression instantly turned cold. He detected the mockery in Brian's tone, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, as tensions rose between them. Alyssa's voice came from behind the two men. Brian, I'm so hungry. Isn't it ready yet? By the time Alyssa walked up to the two of them, their expressions had returned to normal. All right, you go wait at the table first. I'll bring it over right away. Alyssa nodded in agreement. Okay, I'll set the table. After she left, Brian and Eddie each took the grilled fish and meat from the rack, placed them on plates, and carried them to the dining table. Alyssa returned with the lemon tea to find the table already laden with fish and meat. The aroma of charcoal grilled meat lingered at the tip of her nose, and she couldn't resist picking up her chopsticks to take a bite of the grilled fish first. By the time Brian and Eddie returned with the last batch of grilled vegetables, Alyssa had just swallowed the fish in her mouth. Brian set the plate down and sat beside Alyssa. How is it? Does it taste good? Alyssa pointed to one of the fish dishes and spoke up. It's delicious. The flavor is just right, you should try it. Eddie looked at the fish Alyssa had pointed to, the corners of his lips curling slightly. That was the one he had grilled. Eddie picked up his chopsticks and served Alyssa the tenderest piece. Eat more if you like it. It was grilled according to your preferences. Alyssa froze for a moment before turning to look at Brian. Brian's expression remained unchanged as he picked up a piece of fish and took a bite. It really does taste good, mister. Eddie has quite the skill. Eddie picked up the lemon tea on the table and took a sip. It's Alyssa who taught me well. Luckily, she still enjoys my cooking. Hearing this, Alyssa suddenly felt the taste of the fish in her mouth change. Brian didn't seem to mind and used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of fish to feed Alyssa. If you like it, eat more, mister. Eddie worked hard to catch and grill the fish, so of course we should show him our appreciation. As he spoke, Brian winked at Alyssa. Alyssa understood and opened her mouth to eat the meat Brian fed her. The intimate gesture between the two stung Eddie's eyes, and his previously joyful expression instantly darkened. By the end of the meal, Eddie wasn't full from eating, he was full of anger. Brian and Alyssa interacted with such intimate ease, just like a couple deeply in love. In the end, Eddie, afraid he might lose control and flip the table, simply left with a cold remark, "I'm full." He then got up and left, returning to the hotel. Alyssa and Brian, after finishing their meal, took a leisurely walk by the seaside before heading back. The two spent a week vacationing in Tahiti. Eddie stayed with them for the entire week as well. During that time, Eddie kept trying to find opportunities to talk to Alyssa, but Alyssa completely ignored him, treating him as if he were invisible. On the flight back home, Alyssa rested her head on Brian's shoulder, while Eddie sat in the back row watching the two pressed closely together, the fury in his eyes almost tangible. Eddie averted his gaze, refusing to look at them, constantly trying to convince himself in his heart. After returning home, he had Alyssa more opportunities to meet with her, even though their families no longer had business dealings. As CEOs of their respective conglomerates, they always found reasons to see each other. Even if they couldn't meet privately, there would always be various banquets to attend. Brian was just a pilot who couldn't offer Alyssa any assistance in the business world. Thinking this way, Eddie felt his irritation gradually fade. 10 hours later, the plane landed. It was already 8:00 p.m. Eddie went straight back to the office to start working as soon as he got off the plane, without even taking a break. Armstrong family's driver picked up Alyssa and Brian to take them back to the Bay Villa. After arriving home, Alyssa immediately went to take a shower, changed into her nightgown, and prepared to rest in bed. After stepping out of the bathroom and just about to get into bed, she saw Brian sitting on the bedroom sofa, absent-mindedly rubbing something in his hand with a desolate expression. Alyssa looked puzzled as she walked over and sat down beside him. What's wrong? Only then, as she finished speaking, did she clearly see that Brian was holding a bank card in his hand. Brian placed the bank card into Alyssa's hand and spoke slowly. Alyssa, you're the one at a disadvantage by marrying me. I come with no family background or business connections to support you. You had so many better options, yet you still chose to marry me. I'm truly happy that you've made such a firm decision to choose me. This is my salary card and all the savings I've accumulated since I started working. The PN is your birthday. I'm giving it all to you now. I know this money means nothing to you, but it's the best thing I can offer you at this moment. Alyssa looked at the bank card in her hand and shook her head. Just as she was about to speak, Brian interrupted her. Alyssa, I know what you want to say, but this is what I want to give you. I hope you'll accept it. Brian paused, his voice gradually growing hoarse as if remembering something. Also, Alyssa, if in the future you want to reconcile with Eddie, or fall in love with someone else, you must tell me. As long as you say you don't love me, I will leave and won't disturb your life. I only want you to live happily and joyfully. Brian had kept these words buried in his heart for a long time, and today he finally spoke them out. Last time in Tahiti, Eddie's words to him had seemed casual, but he had actually remembered them all along. Eddie was right, the gap in status and position between him and Alyssa was too vast. Deep down, He had always felt insecure, not because he doubted Alyssa's love for him. He was simply worried, what if one day Alyssa forgave Eddie and chose to reconcile with him? What would he do? After all, Alyssa and Eddie had grown up together since childhood. A bond of childhood sweethearts that no outsider could ever compare to. Alyssa listened to Brian's words and finally realized that Brian had always felt indebted to her. Believing he wasn't good enough for her, she let out a slow breath, wrapped her arms around Brian, and spoke softly. Brian, marrying you wasn't an impulsive decision, it was carefully considered. I chose to marry you because I love you, not because I wanted to use you as a tool to make Eddie jealous. I will never forgive Eddie. From the moment he chose to betray me, there was no going back to how things were. Don't underestimate yourself. The fact that I chose to marry you proves my love. To me, you are the best. What I've always wanted wasn't a business partner, but a life partner to walk this journey with me. Alyssa finished speaking, and Brian's eyes reddened at the corners as he tightened his embrace around Alyssa. Alyssa, as long as you still love me, I'll stay by your side forever. Alyssa gently stroked Brian's back, lowered her eyes, and continued, Brian, if one day you betray me like Eddie did, I'll leave you just as I left Eddie. Never, Alyssa. I swear I'll never betray you. Brian held Alyssa's hand tighter and tighter, as if afraid the person in his arms might vanish the next second. They embraced for a long while before finally letting go. Alyssa reached up to touch Brian's reddened eyes. You're such a grown-up. Yet you're still crying. Brian grasped Alyssa's hand and kissed it. Eddie must have sworn to you before, saying he would never leave you, that he would treat you well for a lifetime. But in the end, he still betrayed you. I know whatever I say now might sound like empty promises, but I will show you through my actions. Please believe in me. You've entrusted me with everything you have, so I'll choose to trust you for now. I'm so tired. Let's go rest. Okay, with that. Brian picked up Alyssa and carried her to bed. Alyssa had been exhausted for a while and fell asleep shortly after getting into bed. Brian took a shower and changed into pajamas before going to bed. He gently embraced the sleeping Alyssa, kissed the top of her head, and gazed adoringly at her peaceful sleeping profile. Good night, my love. Eddie went straight to the office to handle work after landing, not returning to the villa until 2 a.m. A light was on in the villa, and Eddie momentarily hallucinated that, as in the past, Alyssa would be lying on the living room sofa, leaving the light on for his late return. He pushed open the door with joy, only to see the butler sitting in the living room. Mr. Eddie, you're back. Would you like some supper? The new butler was indeed dutiful. Knowing Eddie was returning today, he had waited up for him. No need, you can go rest now. Very well, Mr. Eddie. Please call me anytime if you need anything. The butler nodded respectfully to Eddie before turning and returning to his room. Eddie walked into the living room, sat on the sofa, loosened his tie, and rubbed his weary brow as boundless loneliness welled up in his heart. His body was utterly exhausted, yet his mind remained painfully clear, turbulent and aching. Eddie lifted his arm to rest on his forehead, blocking the light from above. Before I knew it, I had fallen into a deep sleep. The next day, Alyssa, after waking up, she went to the corporation and began taking over her father's work. Brian also went to work at the airline. However, he would be flying the Norway route for the next 3 days, temporarily separating from Alyssa again. But every day he would video call Alyssa, phone her, and the two would share their daily lives, their relationship growing stronger by the day. That day, Alyssa planned to leave work early to pick up Brian from the airport as his work trip ended, so they could go home together. Before she could step out of her office, her assistant knocked and entered. Ms. Alyssa, Mrs. Emmanuel is here to see you. She's waiting in the lounge now. Alyssa glanced at the time on her phone. There was still plenty of time before Brian's flight landed, so she nodded. I understand. Alyssa came to the lounge and met Mrs. Emmanuel, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. Eddie's mother. Mrs. Emmanuel saw Alyssa and quickly stood up, warmly pulling her to her side. Alyssa. It's been so long since we last met. I've missed you so much. Alyssa smiled as she gently removed Mrs. Emmanuel's hand and sat down on the sofa opposite her. Auntie, I'm afraid that form of address might be inappropriate now, considering Eddie and I are already divorced. Mrs. Emmanuel was taken aback, clearly not expecting Alyssa to speak to her so bluntly. She had intended to scold her with the authority of an elder as before, but thinking of the now much diminished Emmanuel family, she had no choice but to suppress her displeasure and look at Alyssa with gentle eyes. Mrs. Emmanuel wore a warm smile as she spoke. Alyssa, I know it was Eddie who wronged you, and it's also my fault for not raising him well. I've actually wanted to come see you for a long time, but Eddie kept stopping me, saying I shouldn't disturb you. But now I really can't bear to see the two of you end like this. You and Eddie grew up together since childhood. That bond of childhood sweethearts is something no one else can compare to. You must have seen Betty's apology video, right? I promise she'll never appear before you again. And there won't be any other women around Eddie in the future. Auntie, I've watched you grow up, and our families have been close for so many years. Let's not let an outsider come between us. How about we arrange a dinner with your parents someday? I'll make Eddie apologize to you in person, and we can put this matter behind us. You and Eddie can remarry, and everything will go back to how it was before. Alright. Hearing this, Alyssa smiled faintly and spoke slowly. Auntie, you should know that I'm already married, and my husband and I are very much in love. I have no intention of getting a divorce. As for Eddie, it was over the moment he betrayed me. Auntie, as an elder, I don't want to be too blunt, but please don't come looking for me anymore. The friendship between our families ends here. This isn't just my decision, it's my parents as well. I have other matters to attend to, so I can't speak with you any longer, Alyssa said, then called her assistant over the phone. Escort Mrs. Emmanuel back. The assistant opened the door and entered, addressing Mrs. Emmanuel. Mrs. Emmanuel, the driver is waiting downstairs. Please follow me. Mrs. Emmanuel, who had condescended to visit Alyssa, had been repeatedly slighted by her. Her expression was extremely unpleasant, but with outsiders present, she couldn't make a scene. She stood up, glared angrily at Alyssa, and then spoke with grave sincerity. Alyssa, the reason I'm telling you this today is because I don't want you to regret it later. Think carefully about who's truly right for you. Someone who knows you inside out is always better than a stranger you've just met. Eddie is the one who suits you best. Just think about it. With these words, Mrs. Emmanuel stood up and left. Alyssa watched Mrs. Emmanuel's retreating figure and shook her head. If she continued to be entangled with Eddie, that's when she would truly regret it. Glancing at the time, Brian was about to land soon. Alyssa stepped out of the lounge as her driver took her to the airport. The timing was perfect. She had just stepped out of the car when she spotted Brian emerging from the airport. The driver loaded Brian's luggage into the car and drove them back to the Bayfront villa. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. After 3 days apart, their bond had deepened, making them as sweet and affectionate as newlyweds. Mrs. Emmanuel from that day onward would message Alyssa daily under the guise of caring for her, determined to make her remarry Eddie. Alyssa, after taking over the company, was swamped with work every day, having neither the time nor the desire to pay attention to Mrs. Emmanuel's messages. One day, as Alyssa left work and entered the parking lot, just as her driver opened the rear car door for her, a disheveled woman rushed out and fell to her knees before Alyssa. Alyssa, I'm truly at my wit's end, please. You have to help me. Alyssa furrowed her brows, only recognizing the woman's voice as Betty. The once Betty, who used to be radiant and well-dressed, now appeared in tattered clothes, sallow and emaciated, with visible wounds on her body. Alyssa signaled the driver to help her up. Get up first, let's talk properly. Betty stood up, and only then did Alyssa get a clear look at her current state. Her face was covered in bruises, her hair disheveled, and her eyes sunken, a far cry from her former self, looking much like Alyssa had when they first met. Alyssa, noticing the bustling crowd around them, led Betty to a restaurant owned by the group. After finding a private room and sitting down, Alyssa got straight to the point. Spit it out. Betty looked at Alyssa sitting across from her, a flash of jealousy passing through her eyes. But now, the only person who might be able to help her was Alyssa. Suppressing her envy, she turned a pitiful gaze toward Alyssa. Alyssa, I was wrong before. I shouldn't have been with Mr. Eddie, and I shouldn't have sent you those provocative messages. I was blinded at the time. You were the one who rescued me from hell, yet I treated you like that. I truly know I was wrong. Alyssa, you were willing to fund my education and help me escape that family before. Surely you can't just stand by and watch me die now. Could you give me 5 million? That amount must be nothing to you. Please, I beg you, help me. Alyssa stared expressionlessly at Betty, her voice icy. Betty, what makes you think I'd help someone who once stabbed me in the back? I funded you because I hoped you'd improve, change your fate through your own efforts, and break free from that parasitic family of yours. But how did you do it, knowing full well Eddie is my husband, yet you still got involved with him, sabotaged my family, and tried to take my place? Betty, I'm not that magnanimous. I can't just forgive and forget. The fact that I haven't retaliated against you is mercy enough, and yet you still dare to hope I'd help you. Betty paled as her shame was laid bare, her jealousy clouding her judgment. She stood up and glared furiously at Alyssa. Alyssa, you're only superior because of your privileged background. What makes you so noble? Helping me was just to feed your vanity. If you truly wanted me to live well, you should have given me money and quietly dealt with my parents, instead of leaving me in constant fear of them coming after me again. My brother's gambling debts, they took all the money Eddie gave me. Now I have nothing left, and they're planning to sell me off for a dowry, since you've helped me before. Why can't you do it again? Just 5 million, give me the money, and I swear I'll disappear far away and never bother you again. Alyssa cast a sidelong glance at her. Betty, you brought this upon yourself. I tried to pull you out, but you were the one who cut the rope. I won't help you anymore. With those words, she stood up and left. Betty collapsed to the ground in despair as she came to her senses, overwhelmed by endless regret. Soon, the Tang parents found her and forcibly dragged her away. Alyssa left the restaurant and went straight back to the villa. Today was Brian's first day off, and she didn't want some irrelevant person to ruin their precious time together. Their relationship grew warmer with each passing day. Every time Brian returned from an international flight, he would bring Alyssa a gift. Their life was simple yet blissful. Eddie still hadn't given up on winning Alyssa back, every day without fail. He would send her flowers, deliver homemade meals, and at banquets, he would proactively help Alyssa decline drinks. After a year passed like this, when Eddie came to the corporation to see her again, Alyssa stopped him. Eddie, it's been so long since everything happened. You shouldn't dwell on the past anymore, look forward. I'm very happy now, and no matter what you do, there's no chance of us getting back together. Eddie met Alyssa's gaze, finding not a trace of love or even any unusual emotion, only calmness and resolution. He tried to force a smile, but couldn't conceal the bitterness at the corners of his lips. Can we still be friends then? 7 months from now, you can attend the baby's full moon celebration as a friend. Eddie froze, as if hearing the sound of his heart shattering. At this moment, he finally understood there was no possibility left between him and Alyssa. All right, when the time comes, I'll definitely give the child a big red envelope. With those words, Eddie fled as if escaping. 7 months later, Alyssa and Brian stood on the stage holding their child, thanking the guests for attending the baby's full moon celebration. Eddie sat in the corner of the banquet hall, watching the happy family of 3 on stage. The wine in his mouth growing increasingly bitter with each sip. He didn't stay until the end. After entrusting someone to deliver the full moon gift to Alyssa, he left. Before leaving, he took one last look at Alyssa and murmured, Alyssa, if there's a next life, let's grow up together again. This time, I'll love you properly. The end.